All right, let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Certainly. Councilmember Soria, present. Councilmember Carbasi.
Here.
Councilmember Arias, present. Councilmember Chavez.
Here.
Councilmember Bredefeld.
Here.
Vice President Maxwell.
Present.
And Council President Esparza.
Present. So next will be the invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. So we'll stand, and if you can stay standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Our invocation this morning is by Pastor Trent Wally from Harmony Free Will Baptist Church. Welcome.
Thank you for this privilege to pray over you today. Lord, we come to you and we thank you for this day, and we thank you for life in general, Lord. We thank you for the privilege of serving you in this city of Fresno. And we thank you for these city leaders, Lord, and we lift them up to you this morning. Lord, they have to struggle with some hard decisions, and Lord, in their times together, Lord, may you give them wisdom. May you give them understanding of the situations, understanding of the opposing points of view, wisdom to make the right choices and the just choices, Lord. I give them protection for them, for their families, for their staff. Again, we thank you, Lord, for these leaders, for their desire to serve you in this place, to serve this people. Lord, you are a great God, and we thank you for who you have put in place. Give them wisdom, give them direction, and Lord, give them peace and joy in the work that they do. May much be accomplished today for your glory and for the good of our people. In Jesus' name, amen.
Councilmember Soria, please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, so we'll move on to the approval of the agenda this morning. Clerk, are there any changes or items removed from the agenda?
I did receive one change to the agenda. That is item 1, consent calendar item 1M 22976, adopting the list of proposed SB1 road maintenance and rehab account funding for FY23. That has been moved to the contested consent calendar by Councilmember Carbasi. And I would also like to note we do have our translators on Zoom and our Spanish translator, Amelia, in the council chamber for those who need their services.
Okay. All right, are there any further changes to the agenda?
Yeah, Council President, I'd just like to register a recusal for item 1E for potential conflict. Thank you.
Okay.
Council President, I'd like to table item 1I and 4A for a future meeting.
So items 1I and 4A have been removed as of now. Do we have a date for those, or is that indefinite?
A future meeting. I'll circle back with the city manager.
Okay. Any other council members have? Well, Councilmember Carbasi?
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to recuse myself from 1A because I was not able to attend the special meeting because I had a work conflict.
Oh, Council President?
Yes.
I would also like to note that on 1A approval of the minutes, the June 9th minutes will be on the next agenda, but the other minutes are ready for approval.
Council President,
Yes.
I'd like to pull item 1E for discussion.
1E?
Yes.
Council President, I'd like to pull 1G for a separate discussion.
1G. So for contested consent, so far we have 1E, 1G, and a 1M. Is that correct? Just those three, Clerk?
That is correct.
And we have item 1I and 4A removed from the agenda, and then we have a series of recusals or abstentions.
Correct, yep.
Okay. Any further changes?
I would just register a no on 1F. I don't know if you want to do that now or later, but
Yeah, for the record.
no.
That was 1F?
No on 1F.
All right, any further changes? Quiet morning, I think everyone's tired from the whole week. Okay, all right. Do I have a motion to approve the balance of the agenda?
So, second.
We have a motion and a second. Any opposition to approving the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. No ceremonials this morning. We'll move directly to council member reports and comments. We'll start with council member Soria. We'll circle back to Councilmember Soria. Councilmember Carbasi, do you have any report?
Great job on the no ceremonials this morning. We can get moving. No comment.
I think we were owed this empty ceremonials because we've done like 15 in the last like couple weeks. You guys are animals. Councilmember Arias?
Just one item, Council President.
Of course.
You know, I've gotten a lot of emails and text messages and social media messages about, you know, my colleagues' Facebook and Twitter postings, and I think it's obvious for anyone that we don't agree on those matters. And I also think it's common knowledge that if I ask Councilmember Butterfield to go right, he'll go left. So there's really no use for us to be engaging in, you know, responding to any one particular post. I think if anybody, you know, should weigh in, it should be the mayor, who is Councilmember Butterfield is. You know, thank you again for the time. And as always, we have a full budget deliberation week and council meetings to attend to, and that's where our attention is focused.
Council member Chavez, or Soria, do you want to go for it now? All right, Councilmember Soria, I see you're punched up.
Okay. Sorry, I just had to get my notes. Very brief, just want to thank everyone, all the council members and the mayor who attended our second annual Pride flag raising ceremony. We had a lot of community members that attended, so we want to again just thank everyone, remind folks that June is Pride Month here. We've declared it here in the city of Fresno, so thank you everyone for that. Just also want to remind folks that as summer is here, there are free summer meals that are being provided to kids. And, you know, in particular, I'm going to announce the ones in District 1. But Fresno Unified pickup will happen from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. From now until mid-August, August 12th. We have schools like Cooper Middle School and Fresno High. And then also Central Unified is providing breakfast. It will be served in their cafeteria from 8:30 to 9:30, and lunch will be served from 11:30 to 12:30. And this is Central High East Campus, and then Teague Elementary Schools. Just wanted to put a plug in for those because we know we have a lot of kids in our community. Families are struggling, and this is a good way in partnership with the schools that are providing free meals for working families here in our community. Thank you.
Councilmember Chavez.
No comments today, Council President.
All right, Councilmember Butterfield.
No.
Council Vice President Maxwell.
Nothing to report out at this time.
Wow, you guys are really tired.
Council President, no pressure.
You guys are like my toddler, kind of get you to run around for a few days and you guys go to sleep at night. All right. So just a few things on my part, very, very brief, and I mean it unlike my colleagues, very brief. What has been going on throughout the city? Happy Pride again, I think we've said it, but we'll continue to say it throughout the month of June. Last night, had the privilege of joining the mayor and Granville and ribbon cutting down in the Tower neighborhood. It was in Councilmember Arias' district, but he had a family obligation, so I stepped in as the president and cut the ribbon. Housing. Let's keep building it. It's a good thing, market rate, affordable, all the above. We need units. Want to thank the Fresno Association of Realtors for the invitation to their luncheon. I'll be one of their guest speakers at their annual membership luncheon. Appreciate them and the work they do here in our community. And finally, what everyone's been wondering about since last Thursday, the great mystery of the pet hair on my desk was finally solved. No, Matlock did not solve it. My staff knew about it, and they just came clean yesterday via social media. Yeah. So there was a pug. There was a cute little pug named Pepper that was all over my desk. And my staff didn't want to tell me right away. They wanted me to cool off first. So I just found out yesterday via social media. They didn't actually tell me. So it was a pug. And that explains all the little light hairs that were all over. So it's all cleaned up. Thanks to facilities for getting that straightened out. Anyway, that's what you're all wondering about, I'm sure. Great report of the city. We finally move on to the next chapter of our lives.
President, that kept our city manager up at night from sleeping.
Okay. Okay, you know what? I'm done with the comments, so we're going to move on to the city manager and the mayor for their comments.
I don't have anything.
Mayor, how you feeling? Wow, even the mayor's not saying anything this morning. Yeah.
Because the cameras are not on.
Cameras are on. Yeah, I do have one over there, that's right. Okay, all right. Not used to moving this fast. Let's see, what's next? Consent calendar. Okay, we're on to it. At this point, we'll go ahead and, so again, right now I have E, G, and M pulled for contested. We have I, one I is removed from the agenda. Any last call for?
Motion to approve the consent.
Second.
Yeah, they're on their way.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the balance of the consent agenda. Let's see here. Is there any opposition to approving the balance of the consent agenda? Seeing none, consent passes 7-0.
Council, President, I just want to make a note that 1I will be continued to next council meeting. I know we need a date or else we have to renotice, so it'll be the next council meeting.
Okay, all right. Oh, you know what? We cannot, so we made the motion and passed it, but it is not passed. We do need to go to public comment first before we cast our vote on the consent agenda. So at this point, I'll go ahead and open up public comments. If you're here in the chamber and would like to speak, please fill out a yellow card, bring it up to the clerk. We'll make sure you get the opportunity to speak. If you're on Zoom, feel free to raise your hands and we will call on you. Clerk, do we have anyone on Zoom at the moment? Who's the first speaker? All right, Lisa Flores, good morning. You are the first speaker. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody. How is everyone doing today? First off, I want to thank Esmeralda and Miguel. I'm going to take the high road today. Nelson, the only thing I can say is about Pepper the Pug. You might want to ask Gary to buy you the book, Noodles and the No Bones Day. But he may think it's sexual and, I don't know. But you should really check out Noodles the Pug and the No Bones Day. Great read. My one question is recently, Councilman Swamp Rat down at the end has made some really ugly, bigoted comments. And I'm wondering, at what point will you guys sanction him? Because this is just so obscene. Then my other question is for the councilman at the end. What is your kink? Because I keep seeing all this stuff and I'm wondering, what is your kink? What is your texture, of your hair? And third, for those at home that are playing along with the Swamp Rat Bingo, Just know we should be coming near to our end of the obscene comments that this council member is making. You know, at what point do we stop the hate coming from the dais and start preaching inclusion, acceptance, one Fresno? Because when you go out there and you say things like that, it's just divisive. And I'm not going to give you any more oxygen for what little fire you have, sir. I'm just going to pray that God has mercy on your soul. Thank you.
Our next speaker is going to be Robert McCluskey on Zoom. Robert, are you with us?
I'm sorry, the unmute didn't come up. Thank you very much for speaking today. I just wanted to reiterate a few things that we've been talking about for a while. One is, can we keep the cooling centers open whenever there's temperatures of 100 degrees or more over a 2 or 3 day period? It's the protracted heat that really gets to people. And I know they open at 105 now, but if it's heat that's excessive 3 days in a row, even if it's 100, it really wears on people and puts them at risk of heat stroke. Also, what's up with the shower, a mobile shower and restroom unit? It was approved by the council in April 2021. I understand it was purchased. If you could appraise us, the community, of the, whatever the time frame is, when is that going to be rolled out? And once again, we keep urging temporary safe camps until we can create more housing. And I'm sorry to say that all the housing, 500 plus new beds that have been created with all the money that came in, over 150 million, have all been designated as temporary and transitional. Many of us have been pushing a housing first approach for a long time. It hasn't been embraced by the city. I'd urge you to get together with advocates to talk about how to implement a good housing first program. As I mentioned at previous meetings, it does save the city money in the long term. And once again, please, I know the lawsuit by the ACLU, Des Martinez, Faith in the Valley, and myself is being discussed today. Let's face it, folks, we won. It's time to give it up. Stop wasting taxpayer dollars. I urge you not to try to rewrite this ordinance that was literally blasted apart in the federal court. Thank you very much.
Next speaker is going to be Brandy Noose Villegas.
When we get to that item.
Hello. I hope that if she can't get here there on time, that you will. If there's a woman from the shelters who was on her way, that wanted a ride over there and didn't realize it was going to be public comment was going to be earlier. So I know that they were at Lisa Flores. They were 5 minutes off. So if you can make time for them, but I wanted to. There are several things. One is I don't know if they will make it because she's not there in person, but I was reached out to by some women who wanted to go to city council last week and this week, who were given that were being given notices to vacate the Golden State Triage, saying that they were there for longer than 30 days. And one woman who is very distressed, she wasn't able to come last week and is trying to get here this week, but she thought she was supposed to be there at 10. But she was sick with pneumonia in the hospital. That was given a 30-day notice. She said she did everything that they asked her to do. She was there over a year. She was one of the people off of 168. Her name is Stacy, and we need help for her because she has been given a notice that she has to leave. And there's other people who are given notices who have to leave, and they're confused because they did everything that they were told to do, and there hasn't been shelters for them. I mean, permanent housing for them, and now they're being asked to go back on the streets. And so we do need permanent shelter for them, but we also need people to be able to stay there until permanent housing is available to them. And I asked the city council, I'll try to contact you guys later to see about getting help for those who are being vacated, that they don't end up on the streets just because there is nothing for them to go to. And they've been here since the project off-ramps. I also piggyback on what Soria said about the 100-degree and actually maybe even earlier with the cooling centers, but I want to ask again, I was aware last week that anyone can go to the community centers, even when it's not 105, but they can't if they don't have pets. And so I'm asking if you guys can see about accommodations at all the community centers for pets and for free transportation to community centers, even if it's not a cooling center, so that at any time, if it's hot for them, they can still access the community centers and they don't have the barrier of not being able to afford to take a bus, or because they have pets, that this would be that allowance would be made, but also that for the cooling centers, that especially in the weekend when it's not as open, that the temperature be raised, lowered at least to 100, but 95 because it's hot on the sidewalk. So please make those accommodations. And again, we have someone coming in that I don't know if she wants to speak on, but I ask that you help those who are being exited without a place to go.
All right, thank you, Brandy. Okay, I don't see anyone else here on Zoom. I do see one yellow card incoming here. So again, this is public comment or consent calendar for closed session items and for unscheduled communication. So feel free to come on down. So I have a yellow card here in the chamber. It'd be Cindy Piombino.
I'm out of breath. Good morning. Good morning, Council President Esparza and council members, and Mayor Dyer. Mayor Dyer. Just a few things about the council, about the cooling centers. I would hope that we can lower that temperature down to 100. All of us Fresnoans know when it hits 100, it's hot. Also, I would like to see if we can get a handy ride in some key points to pick up our elderly residents. We have a lot of us seniors out there in wheelchairs with mobility issues, and even not seniors. But I think that these cooling centers are a blessing to our residents here in Fresno, just not our homeless. Times are tough, and people can utilize those, during the day, it won't run their bill up so much. And providing the free fax rides is a double blessing. So I would hope that would happen. I don't know if it's possible, but I'd like to see them open in every district. And also, we need to let our community know that these are going to be open. And if we can get a PSA out on some local stations, and also get some flyers up in key points again. I think that's all. I thank you so much. God bless you.
We have an additional card here in the chamber. Timmy.
Hello, Council. My name's Timmy Too Much. I came on behalf of the homeless over there in Parkway. there's been a lot of things going on over there that I'm not sure if you guys are aware about, such as like the staff's behavior and the way that they've been treating residents, and there's things, man, I was not prepared for this, to be honest. I just found out about you guys having this meeting last night. So I came out here to try to maybe tell you guys a little bit about the behavior of the staff and the food and the visitations that nobody is allowed. Even prisoners get visitations. But last night, yesterday evening, security was caught in a resident's room off duty. Like, he wasn't even like dressed up as a security guard, so it was okay for security to come visit one of us, but not one of our family members. I just don't feel like the bias or favoritism is all right with that. I had a speech ready, man, like a little bit, but not like I should have. I look forward to the next one so I can tell you guys more. But as of right now, the food, mainly that I asked everybody on Parkway, man, I was like, where would there be 3 things that you guys would change if you could change something about these motels? And the top 3 things was the staff's attitude, because none of them really even been through the struggle, man. They don't know what it's like to be homeless. So, and these people got put in charge of countless homeless people, but they don't know the struggle. They don't know what it's like to be homeless or what the implications of being homeless causes. And there's my time. But I got you guys.
You still have 60 seconds. That's the warning.
Oh, okay. And then it was food, visitations, and staff, and then some of them said maintenance. They don't ever get their rooms fixed or their lights fixed, and they'd be put in the dark, and that's something that gets ignored. And dang, I wish I knew what this was going to bring right now. All right. When's the next council meeting, may I ask?
We'll be here next Thursday, June 16th.
All right, I'll be more prepared next time. Appreciate you guys.
23rd. Today's the 16th.
So
next Thursday, June 23rd.
The 23rd?
Yes.
Okay, thank you guys.
Okay. I don't see any more hands on Zoom. I don't see any more yellow cards. Oh, I have one more yellow card incoming. Again, this is unscheduled communication, public comment on closed session, as well as public comment on the consent agenda. This is Sharon or Siobhan? Sean, there we go. Sorry, Sean Robinson. Come on down.
Good morning. My name is Sean Robinson. I'm the president of Edison Babe Ruth Baseball in West Fresno. I'm also the program manager over at Fresno United. I'm coming this morning I'm trying to figure out why Nielsen Park was left out of the parks budget. I did see that it wasn't listed. I've been doing programming over there for about 5 years now as the president. This baseball league has almost 4 decades of organizational programming. I went over there this morning to take pictures of all the damages. Right now it's flooded. The playground part is flooded. The sprinkler systems, they do not work over there. We have broken down gates. I think the bathrooms are terrible. This field was actually named after an individual, a young man who was shot and paralyzed by the name of Andrew Mitchell. I have not seen anything done over there in my 5 years of being the president, besides the grass being mowed. I don't know if I'm doing this right because I've never done this before, but I am an organizer in West Fresno, and I do think that park needs some type of renovation. I'm just asking if you guys could take a closer look at the park and just see if we can fix anything that needs to be repaired over there, because our kids deserve a nice baseball field. This is the only baseball field in West Fresno besides the regional sports park. And so those are my concerns right now as a community member, to see if we could get that park up and running. It's right next to a school. And so whatever we can do to get that park up to speed and up to par, I'd really appreciate it. All right, thank you.
Okay, going over to Zoom, we have Sadia Khan. Sadia Khan.
Hi, just to clarify, we're allowed to speak on everything on the agenda right now? Just want to make sure I'm not out of order.
Yes, I've opened it up. Pretty much everything except unscheduled communication or closed session agenda, or what's on consent. The other items, like the timed 10:05, 10:10, 9 a.m. items, the workshop and all that, those will have separate, but pretty much everything else.
Oh, so 4A will be at a separate time?
4A is no longer on the agenda. So it would have been a separate time, but it's no longer on the agenda. It was removed.
Okay. Well, I don't know if it's appropriate for me to still comment on it or not, but just really want to reiterate that Measure C is not ready for the ballot in 2024. And I'd appreciate if the city council, does not vote in favor of it being on the 2024 ballot without, proper community consent and information. We have not been given proper communication from the FCOG or really anybody about what the drafts look like, what the budget breakdown looks like. All of this information has been very hush-hush. The meetings are being held at times that are not convenient for those of us that are working, so it's very difficult for us to come and voice our concerns. As someone who's going to be raising my child there, as someone who's a young resident, it's difficult for us to see ourselves envisioned in this proposal. Even we know it's needed, it's extremely important, but when our community is not being represented in it, it makes no sense to push it forward, especially when there's no urgency to push it forward. It's not expiring anytime soon. So again, just asking that the city council does not vote if it comes back on the agenda. I ask that you guys do not consider it for the 2024 ballot, and instead, push it to 2027 to allow better input from our community. Thank you.
Next on Zoom is going to be Kimberly McCoy.
Good morning, Council. My name is Kimberly McCoy. I am speaking to you today as a resident of South Fresno. I just want to uplift the comments that were made by a previous speaker, Sean Robinson. Nielsen Park is right in the center of our community. It's right next to an elementary school. That park is utilized heavily by the youth in the neighborhood, and it seems to be a forgotten park. That park needs a lot of TLC, so I just ask that you find some type of money in the budget to be able to maintain that park and be able to fix the things that are broken, be able to keep the bathrooms clean and open, be able to put in a good sprinkler system so it won't be flooded and the kids will be able to utilize it. The shade structure and the playground and the things on there, those are good, but we need to take care of that. That is a baseball field that is highly used in that neighborhood because a lot of our kids and families can't travel all the way to the Jensen Sports Complex. So I just ask that you guys really consider investing in that park for our community. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further yellow cards, no one punched up on Zoom, going to close public comment. Now let's move back to the consent agenda. I had Councilmember Carbasi punched up. Slipped out. Okay, can I get a motion in a second on the consent agenda? Again?
Second.
And just for the record, clarifying that 1I will be tabled to next council meeting on June 23rd.
Okay, any opposition to approving the balance of the consent agenda? Seeing none, item passes 5-0. Let's move on to the contested consent agenda, beginning with item 1E.
I'm going to step out, Council President.
Okay. Item 1E is pulled by Council Vice President Maxwell.
Morning, Council President. Council members, Joe Vargas, Director.
Hey, good morning, Director Vargas.
Good morning.
I pulled this item. I did read through it last night, but can you explain to me again what is the agreement currently in place between the city, social services, EOC, and what is being asked for today on this item?
So the current agreement with EOC, in last year, in 2021, we went out and did a notice of funding availability and selected EOC, or Fresno Economic Opportunities Commission, to be our consolidated transportation service agency social service provider.
What does that mean, Director?
It's basically AB 120 back in 1979. I'll give you a little history, and I have my colleague back here, Moses Stites, who is more of a historian of this program. But in 1979, CTSAs were formed by AB 120. And then in 1982, the Fresno COG designated FACTS along with EOC as recipients or co-CTSAs, along with, on the rural side, FCRTA. Last year, Fresno COG redesignated to only have FACTS as the CTSA, and then us, in coordination with FCRTA, put out a notice of funding opportunity, and again selected EOC to be the sole service provider, social service provider. So what they do is they pull in different social service programs, and they also provide social service programs. So they support services such as ARC of Central California, UCP, United Cerebral Palsy, CVRC, and then they also do their own services, meal delivery, and they also do Head Start. And then they also support us in providing service to Veterans Home, that shuttle that runs for free for our veterans into downtown. And then this next fiscal year, we'll be adding service to the Three Palms Mobile Park.
So COG is the entity that designates the CTSAs here within the...
Correct.
So given that it's social services, I mean, why isn't there any responsibility placed on the county as the local municipality that oversees social services?
Well, this is very specific to TDA funding, so the state funding. And again, it flows through the COG, and then they designate, it's Article 4.5, so again, very specific funding for social service. It requires a 55% match, so we only provide 45% of the support. But again, it runs through the COG. It's similar to what we receive for our general public transit assistance. So it's not, I don't believe it's associated with the county, but, oh, there's Moses. Here's Moses. Maybe Moses can provide a little more information on that.
Sure.
Thank you. Moses Stites, FCRTA General Manager. And Vice President, to your question, really the FCOG in its establishment has member agencies. And the
Could you put the microphone just a little bit closer?
Oh,
Thank
sure.
you, sir.
Thank you. The county, as part of the consortium with FCOG, is a member agency of FCOG. So they are part of the 15-member agency with FCOG. So they do have a role in overseeing the designation. And specifically, the county and all the other cities allocate the annual funding, which is 5% of the Transportation Development Act. And it's directly allocated to, as Joe indicated earlier, to the urban area and also the rural area as well, proportionately, approximately and I'm just going to be approximate numbers here, 1.4 to 1.5 million in the urban area and another 700,000 in the rural area. And the designation is specifically toward the city of Fresno, FACTS, and FCRTA in the rural area, respectively. EOC is a large community-based organization, has been operating the CTSA since 1983. However, FCOG redesignated that status in 2021, making FCRTA the sole designee in the rural area and the city of Fresno FACTS in the urban area.
So none of the services paid for with the city funds that are going through us are providing rides outside of the city of Fresno?
That's correct. They're restricted to the urbanized area, and there's
Does that
also...
include Clovis?
Pardon me?
Does that include Clovis?
No, a good question. Clovis is a separate CTSA, and that is currently operated by the city of Clovis, Clovis Transit, and they operate their stagecoach and their stage line. They don't have a subrecipient for the social services. Because FCRTA and City of Fresno Fax is predominantly a public transit agency, it's best suited that we get a social service agency to oversee those social service operations. As Joe indicated, you know a lot of those participants, UCP, ARC, Head Start, FM AAA, getting seniors to the meal sites, both congregate and homebound. So there's a lot of initiative that is afforded by having the social service agencies. The other thing, too, keep in mind that the restrictions with public transit, as you know, with fare box recovery, other restrictions with the California Highway Patrol for operating public transit buses, they're different with social service agencies. So there's a lot of latitude in providing those services that don't have those state requirements as far as fare box, running them through the Social Service Consolidated Transportation Services Agency.
What vehicles are used for this program?
Good question. Various vehicles. They have a category of meal delivery vans, which are cargo vans. Some are refrigerated to get the meals to the congregate meal site because they have to be within a certain temperature to get them to the congregate meal sites.
What about for the people transportation?
People transportation as well, and those are
vans?
Those are vans. They're cutaways. They're paratransit vans. And then there's the Head Start school buses, which transport the Head Start school kids, both in the urban and the rural area.
So if I wanted to utilize this service, I wouldn't go through the city of Fresno, I would go through one of these agencies?
Yeah, that's correct. You would go through EOC, which EOC has the prime responsibility, being the lead, to really initiate participation. And the reason FCOG redesignated was that FCRTA and the City of Fresno Fax was concerned about the availability of additional social service agencies. So through this redesignation and a change at EOC with marketing and outreach, they've been able to get additional agencies to participate in this social service program so that it benefits more social service agencies both directly and indirectly.
So is 100% of this program paid for with the state funds?
No city funds are used for this. It's strictly Transportation Development Act funding, and it's 5% of what the FCOG receives annually, and that's the amount I stated earlier, approximately $1.5 million in the urban area and approximately $700,000 in the rural area.
And does that also account for administrative costs?
Yes, it
personnel?
does. And there's a caveat there. One of the incentives to this program, to making it stretch, there's a 45% requirement. So for every 45% of the LTF dollars, local transportation funds, the social service agencies are required to step up with 55% of the funding. So if for every dollar that is put out there, it consists of 45 cents of LTF, TDA money, 55% matching funds from the social service agencies. So they're essentially vesting partners, and it's audited every year and every 3 years by the agencies and also the FCOG.
Okay, I think that'll conclude my questions. I'll make a motion to approve. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Vice President.
And Councilmember, just so you know, on the attachment, it does list all of the vehicles and the breakdown between the urban and rural, and also the splits are all listed, beginning with page 16.
Yeah.
I'll second that, but I do have questions.
Sure. I want to thank Moses. He's been educating me on CTSA for the last, probably since I started this position. he done?
Sorry, it's my 15-year-old. I do have questions on this item.
Sure.
Director, can you walk me through the service you'll be providing for 3 Palms Mobile Home Park located on McKinley, Golden State, and the 99?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we met with, we actually did an event out there with Leadership Council, trying to figure out, what kind of trips, what kind of lifeline trips we could provide for them. What came out of that is, they want some service out to shopping, groceries, get out to other shopping centers. And so what we'll be doing beginning in July, hopefully we can figure out a route to connect them on different days to those type of connections.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you could work with our office, I know I met with them too, and their primary concern was not being able to go to Vallarta's around the corner because of the train tracks, the construction, and...
Yeah, I think one of the things they told us was Vallarta is too expensive and we want to go to Walmart.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, we'll be happy to connect with you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then my second question is, there was a note on the urban $1.5 million. How's that split? I recognize urban is now Fresno and Clovis. Is Clovis considered an urban?
No, so on the urban side, Clovis receives their own allocation under CTSA, and then urban Fax receives 1.3 to 1.5 annually, and the FCRTA gets their allocation.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And my secondary question is, since Fresno County has relocated thousands of social service employees to Clovis, is Clovis going to change their public transit routes to take people there?
Yeah, they already have. They've actually provided all the amenities, all the improvements to that. What's a really nice stop along Peach.
But I'm speaking about additional routes into that area.
That I'm not sure. I know in talking to Amy Hance, the head of Clovis Transit, they're going through an assessment of all their routes. So, but I know they do provide service directly to the campus there.
And were we ever reimbursed by the county for having to reroute our route to their facility that they relocated?
No. As much as we asked, that was a no.
Were we ever reimbursed by Measure C or the COG for the rerouting of that facility?
No, we didn't get any additional Measure C funds to provide that. Again, we were just using existing, we aligned a route to be able to get out there.
What was the cost that we encumbered for Fresno County's relocation of social services?
It's unknown, council member.
What do you mean it's unknown? Don't you
it's-
know how much it cost to
it was
reroute?
essentially
To reroute, so it really was essentially a break even for us.
Yeah, it was a cost neutral move.
Right, on the turning the bus the other way. But I think ultimately what I was talking about with the unknown is it's unknown what the impact on the individuals are and what the cost is overall. Because not everyone is riding our service, as you may have read and talked to your constituents. Not everyone's riding our service to get to that location. And as you may have just seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks, now the Costco site across the street is now open, and 2 more buildings have emptied downtown.
Yeah.
And that's the child welfare.
Yeah, but it's assistant manager. We do know the impact, right? We know that going from West Fresno to downtown takes you X amount of time. Going from West Fresno to Clovis takes you X amount of time and X amount of routes. So we do know the impact to people. And I recall a couple years ago, you staff asking this council to fund the rerouting to the Clovis site, and we said no. We should not have to fund the rerouting of a route when the county is initiating that change. I think it was Route 28.
Yeah, 28 got moved.
Councilmember, I don't remember asking you to pay for it.
Cost.
I think what we did was, when we did the fair equity study, we said that this is the impact, which was negligible at that point. It was really flipping the bus going an opposite direction.
Yeah, that particular route, that was cost neutral, and it was a combination of other changes that we made at the same time. But again, we rerouted that from going out to Fresno State and then just staying on.
Yeah, but
on
Director,
Dakota.
I want us to be, when you say cost neutral, when you say we made other changes, what you're saying is we changed routes in the existing network to find the cost savings to be able to make it cost neutral.
Correct.
When you say we don't know the impact, we do know the impact to customer ridership that is now 2 or 3 hours to be able to get to the
Oh, no, absolutely.
location, right?
I think that was a lengthy discussion in our office related to that change, but we felt like it was extremely important for us, again, to connect our community to that location. Otherwise, they would have only had Route 45, which at the time was operating at 1 hour frequency, and you'd have to go into Manchester, catch it, and then head over. And it wasn't even at the location. It was off, Ashland.
Got it. And just to confirm, were any Measure C funds used to cover the cost of us making those adjustments to make it cost neutral?
Well, in general, we use Measure C. I can't specify that it was specifically for Route 28, but in general, we use Measure C for operating, so.
Thank you. With that, turn it back to the Council President.
We have a motion and a second on the table already. Any opposition to approving item 1E? Seeing none, item passes 6-0. All right, next item on contested consent is 1G, pulled by Councilmember Arias.
Mr. President, can I interject just for one moment? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Look, it's easier to stay silent on these things, but there is a sign in the chamber right now, and I'm a firm believer in the First Amendment. Mr. Elizondo, I cannot make you put down that sign, but I'm a believer in God, and as one God-believing human to another, I'm asking you, please. It uses a 3-letter F word that is a very offensive slur to a lot of people. I'm just pleading with you. Can you please take that sign down? That's all I'm asking. If you could just do that, that would make a big difference. Please.
Thank you, Councilmember Carbasi. We'll move back to item 1G with Councilmember Arias, who pulled it.
Thank you, Assistant Director Sky. I do appreciate the additional information for the council's benefit. I requested a list of all the shelters that are funded by the city, the county, and the COC. I did see the city and the county ones, but I wanted to point out just a couple of things. I believe Naomi's house closed a couple years ago. I don't think it's no longer serving women and children at the Parvallo facility, so just want to make a note of that. And then secondly, and more importantly, I wanted to call attention to, give me a second here.
And while he looks for that, I don't believe Naomi's house has ever served children. It's just women, correct?
Correct.
It used to serve women, yeah.
No, it was,
Yeah.
you said women and children. I'm just correcting it. It's never served children. It's always served just women.
No, I think there was children there because there's a playground.
That's for the health clinic.
No, I think there was children there. At least in 2019 when I stopped by, there was children there. My question, Director, was you also noted in your list of housing resources was the infamous trailers that we got from the governor in 2020. Where are those trailers at? You don't have to answer me today, but can you find the trailers? The last time I drove through my district, I saw them parked on 180. There's probably like 3-4 dozen of those trailers that were given to the city and the county by the governor for housing the homeless. They look not to be occupied at all. They were in the CAT facility, parking lot. So can you track down the trailers, find out, I believe the city is the official owner of some of them, and what we're doing to house our homeless, because I recall pretty brand new trailers, and I at least noticed that they were empty.
Yeah, I can provide some preliminary information, and I will go back and provide you a full explanation once I gather that detail. But I know that the county is looking for sites, for locations currently. I know they are in discussion with one particular potential site, and I'll provide additional information when I get it from the county.
I would like to recapture the ones that are owned by the city and that were assigned to the city. I don't trust the county to find the appropriate location or to utilize them. They've been in my recollection, now empty for almost 2 years. So I know we have parking lots on different properties that we've acquired. There's other places, but those trailers should have a couple people in them at least. Yeah, those parking lots is what I'm referencing. You know, it's just, it's right now, it just seems like, you know, it feels like an RV park where a bunch of, you know, RVs are empty and just parked there when they could be utilized. So,
Okay,
thank you, and you can just get back to the housing committee when you find the additional information.
Absolutely. Yep, happy to.
With that, I'll make a motion to approve, and thank you again for the inventory of assets that we have.
Second. We have a motion, we have a second. I don't see anyone punched up. Is there any opposition to approving item 1G? All right, seeing no opposition, item passes 7-0. Going to move on to item 1M, as in Mary. That was pulled by Councilmember Carbasi.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Director Mosier, I know you've been working nonstop on the budget. I apologize, I did not get to talk to you about this beforehand, so we will do it out here. So this item is regarding our SB1 gas tax dollars, and I have a couple of questions. What is the fiscal year 23 allocation, total SB1 allocation to the city of Fresno?
Good morning, Council. Scott Mosier, Public Works Director. So within your packet are two tables. One is the fiscal year 23 table, and what the state requires us to do is to show the new revenue coming in, and that dollar amount is $11.6 million. I wanted to clarify, you know, we brought it forward at this time, so it's concurrent with budget hearings. So the total amount of SB1 in the budget, city budget, is really the 11.6, plus there is a carryover list where it's unfinished work from 22 that's also in the 23 budget.
Okay. So, for example, if you can pull up the 23 list, if you could just see it in front of you, it shows under District 2, fourth down, Audubon and Lexington Avenues. So this is $82,000, whereas on the list of what's carried over, $50,000. Sometimes I'll see the same item on this list year after year. Can you explain how that process works? Are these old items that are being carried over, or is this additional funding to that project?
Glad to explain. What we tried to do a few years ago with the state and California Transportation Commission was to simply combine those dollar amounts together. And the state actually rejected our list and said, city, you cannot do that. What the state requires is that the brand new money, the next year revenue, is shown on a list of projects, even if it's the same project as before. So great example with the Audubon Lexington. There is a carryover amount that the council already approved and allocated toward that project. So the city's budget will show the carryover plus the new allocation toward that project. Because the state says you have to show the list only with the brand new projects. You can't mix your carryover. Okay.
I'm just trying to make sure that the items we're looking at here, I'm not basically showing the same money for...
Correct.
Got it. Okay. And then can you tell us a little bit about some of the improvements that people can see on Audubon and Lexington? Some of the things we're talking about here?
Absolutely. And the budget, the mayor's proposed budget in the 5-year capital section for Audubon and Lexington shows the design phase this fiscal year, and then it's roughly about $1 million construction project in 24. So what's proposed there is a roundabout to address both the speeding, high volume of traffic on Audubon, and just the difficulty residents are having making left turns out of their neighborhood. It's not an intersection that we could install stop signs because the warrants are not met. We couldn't install a traffic signal, warrants are not met, but it's an excellent location for a roundabout. Okay. So that'll start, that's already started some design work. We're at about 30% complete on plans, and this next year we'd move forward 100% and be ready to bid and award the following fiscal year.
Yeah, I see right now a completion date of about June of 23.
Yeah, on this phase, yes, correct.
Okay. On this phase, when do you think, and we never know, God forbid there's COVID 2.0, 3.0, when will we get the next, when do you think it could be completed?
Then what we are positioning ourselves for is to be able to bid that project at that point, award a contract for construction in the summer of '23, then the contractor could start work in fall 2023, finish up about spring '24.
Okay. The reason why I bring this up, and it's just, and I've spoken to the administration about this several times, after the left turn phasing at Star Elementary, which you've been immensely helpful for these last 3 years, Audubon mitigation is going to be really a priority for me. We've had some accidents by Woodward Park. There's no way to cross the street. People try to avoid Nice, so they go through Audubon as a shortcut, and I'm really worried that something terrible will happen. And it's something that I think council members in the past tried accomplishing. I think that we're poised to do it now. So this is something that's going to be on my radar, and you've been very helpful, and Jill, so far to this point, but I'm going to be pushing a little bit harder on that. Okay. Let's talk briefly about the left turn phasing at Star Elementary. This has been a long time needed. It looks like, and we are on track, which is great, it says here October of '22 as a completion date. Are we still on track for that?
We are. That project was bid, and the construction contract came to council earlier this calendar year.
Right.
So we are on track.
Well, I'm really grateful for that because that's right next to Star Elementary, and it's a really big issue for our schools. Okay, that really answers all my questions. Thank you very much. That's all I have, Director.
Thank you.
I have Council Vice President Puched up.
Hey, thank you, Director Mosion. We spoke about this briefly yesterday as well. The reason I'm seeing the same projects from last fiscal year on this fiscal year is that they're receiving additional funding for the upcoming fiscal year SB1 funds. How am I going to know if these are fully funded at this point, or if they're going to be carried over again next year for additional funding?
Well, at the moment, they are fully funded. Let me share a little bit about.
They'll be fully funded if we approve this, or
if council approves this item and approves the city budget.
All my projects will be fully funded.
Then they would be fully funded. Correct. The carryover issue really comes down to workload versus staff capacity, and we've had two challenges. Really, one is just vacancies. Either if we're talking a project that we're bidding out, our engineering staff who have left for other positions, retirements, and working through those, filling those vacancies, which personnel's being a great help to do on a daily basis. And then in street maintenance division, one thing council may recall, we added the $3.5 million in infrastructure funding for this year, but with that, it did not bring any staff positions for that. So in order to squeeze that in and tackle that work, in some cases, for example, with particular council district, something may have been a really, really big priority with other funding available. We were able to slip that in, but the trade-off was that some of these that were deemed not as high a priority, yet these are all priority projects, but some of them had to slip the next year. Plus, we have had a handful of, again, COVID-related situations. Someone, is positive, close contacts, takes out the whole crew in situations. So, but I'm confident we're hoping and praying we're mostly behind that now.
So even though they're fully funded, upon approval of this item doesn't necessarily guarantee they'll be completed within the calendar or the fiscal year.
And you have my commitment. We will always talk with your office about if there are those trade-offs of trying to apply resources to get something else done more quickly, if there's a trade-off and something needing to slide.
When will your office be able to identify and present to our team, Director, the proposed FY24 SB1 projects?
The mayor's budget, as presented, does show a 5-year plan. So currently there are some funding allocations. Again, that's tentative.
Does that break it down by fiscal year? Which ones you plan on prioritizing each one of those 5 years?
That does. That is only, however, for what we would call the capital improvement projects that would be bid out. What that would not show you would be for projects undertaken by our street maintenance division with the crews and resources. That's a year-to-year list and prioritization with the council. But we can certainly sit down and talk through all the needs, for example, in your district and how we might see that with that funding and how far we could get in the 5-year plan.
Appreciate that. Just last, I guess, request. You and your team do a good job of debriefing me in my office about once a month on all the projects. Can you just add as a reminder in there during our monthly projects, if something's in there but not fully funded and we'll need to go to the next year to receive additional SB1 or whatever, just to keep making me aware of that so I don't have a false expectation.
Absolutely.
I don't think you've done that. It's just there's a lot of information to process in those meetings, and sometimes I forget. So if you could just remind me during those meetings which ones are fully funded at the moment versus which projects will need to be carried over into the next fiscal year for additional funding, I would appreciate it.
Most definitely.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Second. Did you motion, Carbasi? Okay, I'll second that.
We have a motion, we have a second. I don't have anyone else punched up. Is there any opposition to approving item 1M, as in Mary? Seeing none, item passes 7-0. All right, that concludes contested consent. Next item would be the 1010 item, Park West Development, and that's
Well,
in
Council
Councilmember Soria's district.
Council President, we're going to table that item for next week. So
Okay.
I think I have to make a motion, Mr. Clerk, or
Consensus of this.
consensus? Okay. If there's consensus and we're okay, it'll come back next week.
Okay, all right, so we'll see this item next Thursday. The only item we have left on public session here is going to be the workshop 3A, and the Measure C renewal. Let's go ahead and proceed with that.
Yes, Council
They are
President.
here, so.
And if I may, just on behalf of the Transportation Committee, we met with the administration yesterday, and how we would like to proceed today is, of course, allow the COG and Fresno FCTA to present the Measure C renewal, and then also allow the community to present their concerns, and then for us to do Q&A after both presentations. So you have the floor, FCTA.
All right, council, let's try and get this workshop completed before lunchtime. We have an hour 45.
Council, thank you for the opportunity to be here today to talk to you about Measure C. I'm Mike Leonardo, the Executive Director for Fresno County Transportation Authority. Tony Bourne, who is the Executive Director for Fresno Council of Governments, is also here today and may be in the question and answer. There may be things that we could direct to him as well. So this, excuse me, this is new to me. Let me make sure I have this figured out. Okay. So I'm going to start with just a brief history of Measure C. Measure C has been in place, I'm sorry, and I think I hit it twice, since 1986. Yeah, the first half-cent sales tax for Measure C started in 1986. It was a 20-year measure. That measure was focused primarily on urban and rural highways. 75% of the money went towards those type of facilities, with 25% of it going for local funds for some of the items that are listed on the slide. So local streets and roads, bicycle, pedestrian facilities, airport, and public transportation services. In 2007, the measure was renewed for an additional 20 years. The complexion of this measure was very different than the first one, where 75% of the money had been spent on highways in the first one. Only 30% of the money went to that in this second measure, with the remainder going primarily to local services. So there was a significant investment in the local roads, in public transit, in bike and ped facilities, environmental enhancements, and this measure had what started out as a rail consolidation program, but when that became infeasible, was converted to a grade separation program, which ultimately has funded the work at the Blackstone and McKinley crossing of the BNSF Railroad. So just to kind of give you a context, this, I think you're aware, but this is a county-wide measure. It covers the 15 local agencies, the incorporated cities within the county, as well as Fresno County itself. And then Fresno County represents, I think there are 30 some odd small, rural, unincorporated areas that are within their area of jurisdiction. And this measure is intended to help improve transportation really across the county. Certainly Fresno is the largest, both geographical and population area, and would receive the majority of the funds, but there are funds in this program really for every area of the county. We started the renewal process by establishing 2 committees, and the slide that's in front of you is our technical working group. It was made up of members from every local agency in Fresno County. It had business interest, it had community-based organization interests, it had active transportation, schools, labor. It was a very comprehensive committee that was established. The role of that committee was, as their title indicates, they were technical in nature. Their job was to take a look at what the transportation needs are throughout the county, identify what the various funding sources, some of what you discussed in the earlier item, SB1 being an example of another funding source, and then look at what the funding gaps are that Measure C could help bridge. And then ultimately they came up with the allocation plan that I'll talk about in a few moments that tried to best address what those funding gaps were. We also had an executive committee. This was a little higher level. I liken this to a political overlay of the technical folks. So much as you have technical staff that presents the technical aspects of an item to you, you provide that political overlay of does this make sense for the areas that you represent. This committee was, it had public agency representation, but not every public agency was represented. Again, there were business interests, there were community-based organization interests, and education was included in this. There were 17 meetings of this group, and I think on the prior slide, I won't go back to it, but I think we had 22 meetings of the technical working group to help put together this plan. And I've already, actually, I've covered what the responsibilities were. I will add that one of the primary things that we expected them to look at was the polling that was done as part of their overlay of does this make sense, because ultimately, for Measure C3 to be successful, it has to have a 2/3 vote of the population. And the poll helps us judge what it is that people believe their needs are. So we've, through a part of this process, we had 14 workshops and community meetings. We went door to door in many of the small rural unincorporated areas and incorporated areas, knocking on people's doors, asking what they felt were their greatest transportation needs. I believe a little over 1,000 of these were Spanish speakers, and so their surveys were gathered that way. Because of the COVID impacts, we had a number of virtual meetings with the public as well. We did online and in-person surveys with 2,800 surveys, 2,000 comments. And then, as I mentioned, we did 2 public opinion polls with total response from the 2 polls was over 5,500 or about 5,500 people, which I think all of you are familiar with polling, but those are significant numbers for a county our size. Basically, to have close to 3,000 pollees in each of the polls it's a pretty significant number. You typically only see that in a presidential election. Our pollster does this around the state, and this is the, if not the highest, one of the highest number of respondents that they've dealt with. So I've got just a few of the slides from the public opinion poll. I will mention that 2 things. Number 1, the full poll is on our website, and you are welcome to take a look at it in its entirety. We also, the company that presented the poll is very good at presenting that, and if sometime in the future you'd like to have a presentation on the full polling results, we'd be happy to provide that. So this first poll, we asked 1/3 of the people polled, would you support extending a measure that was 20 years, 30 years, or until ended by voters? And what we found is they were statistically the same. It was 80 to 81% that would support it regardless of the duration. Probably more significantly on this slide, if you look at the bottom red where the definite no, it's between 9 and 11%, and our pollster tells us that that's very unusual. You almost always start with a 20% deficit. You have 20% of the people that are strongly opposed. So not only do we have very strong support at the top end, we have very low opposition at the bottom end. So this just gives you a breakdown of support by the urban areas and then the surrounding area. And so you can see that the highest support within the urban area was in the city of Fresno itself. The lowest was it says Clovis unincorporated, but reality that goes all the way up into the mountains. So that was the northeastern section of the county, starting from the Clovis boundary all the way up to up 168 into the mountains. The support cut across all income spectrums. The strongest support actually was in the lowest income areas, but the lowest level of support was 78%, which is still very significant. And then I just have a couple slides that these are the top issues that people identified. The first 5 that are on this slide are all related to fixing local roads. Some of them are just reworded, some of them expand, some of them talk about fixing roads in disadvantaged neighborhoods, but these are by far the highest polling areas that we received, as high as 81%. The letters to the left sort of designate what they are, and so the R on these is for roads. The next highest was creating local jobs. The F is for financial, and then the T is for transit. Keeping transit fares low for the disabled, seniors, and veterans pulled very high. And then the rest of it kind of continues the same trend. While it gets beyond local roads, the idea is fix it first. There are issues that we have in our existing system, and voters would like to see those issues addressed. So what we found through this process is the greatest need is fixing local roads. It's particularly when you get into the neighborhoods. Neighborhood road repair does not have a good funding source. Your SB1 funds are not eligible for that. You can use most of the state and federal funds available for road repairs are limited to your arterials and collectors. You can't get into the neighborhood streets. And so being able to do that was a major part of the allocation plan that was put together. So we did an overall needs assessment. The basis of that was primarily the 2022 Regional Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategy developed by Fresno COG. But Fresno COG also did a countywide pavement condition survey. And I know the city of Fresno does their own. The results are very similar. And that's where we identified really the extent of the need within the road system. And then I mentioned we identified other funding sources and then determined what the funding gaps were. There were a number of allocation principles, and actually many of these started in the RTP and SCS, but the 2 committees, they adopted some guiding principles for us. Local choice, local control, that's very important, we believe, for every local agency in Fresno County. We want to give you the funds to address these transportation issues, but you are in the best position to identify where those funds need to be spent. Flexibility, I'll talk about it a little bit later, but there's a concern that in 30 years, how do you lock in for 30 years? Well, this measure has flexibility built into that. I already mentioned fix it first. That's obviously the people's highest priority. Improve every neighborhood. Improve safety, that was a constant theme that we heard, is to improve safety both in the urban and in the rural areas. And then equitable distribution of these transportation resources. So there was a projection of funding made, and the projection indicated that for 20 years we could probably raise about $4 billion. For 30 years it would be about $6.8 billion. And that's important as we start to, when I talk about duration of the measure. Oops, I hit that twice, sorry. So this is the allocation plan that the technical working group and the executive committee overwhelmingly approved. 51% of the money goes to fixing local roads. And I'll compare it to the existing measure in a moment, but that's compared to 15% in the current measure. So this is a significant investment in fixing our neighborhoods, fixing the roads that lead to our neighborhoods, but fixing the roads in our neighborhoods. There's 18% local control. I mentioned earlier the desire to have local agencies to have the flexibility to address their highest transportation needs. That's a larger piece than it was in the current measure. And the idea there is that the transportation needs in the city of Fresno may be very different than the transportation needs in the city of Fowler. And so this gives each agency the ability to direct those funds as they best see fit. The major road and highway program is 15%, which is, it's currently 30% in the program, so this is a much smaller slice. And it's focused really on fixing the existing system. There's been a lot of talk about building new freeways, building new highways. That's not what this program is about. This is about fixing problems on the existing system. There are a few projects that are widening, but those are really focused on rural safety and then managing congestion. Urban and rural public transit is 12%. That's a lower percentage than it was in the existing measure, but it's a significantly more money. In the current measure, transit will receive something shy of $300 million over the life of the measure. This is 2.5 times that, with also $812 million dedicated to public transit. And then there's a small piece for environmental sustainability. That's a little bit of a misnomer in that there's environmental sustainability built into each of these other programs, but this is dedicated specifically to that. And then safe bikes and pedestrians. This is a small amount on a percentage-wise, but I'll show you in the next slide really why that makes sense. So this is basically the same information that was presented in the chart in tabular form, but I want to direct your attention to the far right-hand column. And so, just starting in the middle, what that right-hand column is what's the overall need by category and how much existing funding plus Measure C funding will be dedicated to that and what that does. And so you can see that 95% of the active transportation need is met, 96% of the transit need is met. The lowest number is in the local street repair and maintenance program. We still think this is the right allocation. It will allow us to get to a pavement condition index of 70 throughout the county. That's in the good category. It's important to get into the good category because then your future costs become very low. This compares the two measures, and I kind of spoke to this in the prior diagram, but I wanted to show them side by side. And in order to increase the maintenance program to what we did, we had to decrease on a percentage basis what the other programs got. But yet every program still gets more money in this measure than they got in the current measure. I wanted to dive a little bit into improve every neighborhood. One of the concerns that has been expressed is that agencies, not all agencies, may direct these funds to the most needing areas within their community. We think that the agencies will do the right thing, but we wanted to put some controls in there. Basically, the way the plan is built, a minimum of 30%, and that is a minimum. It can be 100% if that's the decision that the governing body wants to make, but a minimum of 30% has to go into disadvantaged areas. There's the definition of the Expenditure Plan of what that is, and that has to continue until those areas get to a PCI of at least 65. Then the flexibility increases, but the expectation still is that every agency will get their average PCI to 70. I'll skip the last part because I'm going to talk about bonding a little bit later. So what's it mean for me? What's it mean for the city of Fresno? This chart shows what the local program, so this isn't the entire program, but this is what the local programs will bring to each agency. And so we've highlighted here for Fresno almost $2.8 billion over the 30-year life. And while there are some controls within what you spend that money on, how you spend it is at your discretion, as it is with every other local agency. These were based on a formula of 75% population and 25% road miles. That's what's in the current measure, and that was done to reflect that if it was strictly population, the Fresno County has the highest number of road miles in the state of California. And so there needed to be some reflection that the county road system needs to be addressed as well. So the 75-25% formula seems to be working, and so it was proposed to move forward with it. The transit allocation, that's split 70% to FACTS, 20% to rural transit, and 10% to Clovis Transit. And again, that's consistent with how the money is split in the existing measure. This is a breakdown then of how the Fresno allocation compares to the total. So you can see in the first 3 local programs, Fresno gets 46% of that. Within the transit program, you get 70% of that. I haven't talked yet about the major highway program, but that will be additive to this. So the major highway program, it's just shy of $1 billion, but there's about $1.5 billion of matching funds that we believe that we'll be able to take advantage of to deliver these projects. I've listed what those are. I won't read them off, but that's one of the strengths of Measure C, is by having these local funds, we're able to leverage other money, and we're able to compete for funds we wouldn't normally be able to. For instance, I have listed state-local partnership program. That's only available to Measure counties. So if you're not a Measure county, you can't participate in that program. The total of that was then split 75% urban, 25% rural, which is a pretty close match to the population split. And then of that urban portion, Fresno receives 80% of it and Clovis 20%. And again, that's proportional to the population split between the 2 areas. So when you work that all out, there's another $1.5 billion that will be coming to projects within the city of Fresno. So this sums it up. When you add those two, and there's just a note here that there's also $35 million within that total for the airport in Fresno, it's a total of $4.3 billion to the city of Fresno over the next 30 years. This is a list of the Tier 1 projects that are within that major highway program. This list is really just for the first 15 years of the measure. This is one of the flexibility measures that is built into this. There were a number of concerns that you can't know what projects you're going to need 30 years from now, and we agree with that. We have an idea, but we don't know. And so we identified 15 years of projects, and then we set this up to where just before the 15-year point, we'll kind of start this process over again. We won't have to go to the ballot, but we'll start the process over about looking at, okay, what are the needs? Do we need to move money across programs? And then what are the projects? I mean, there could be a huge shift in the way we get around in the next 15 years. And so this mid-measure look gives us the ability to take a hard look at that and make changes at that time. This is the Tier 2 list. These are projects that were identified as being a priority that could be in that second 15 years, but they don't have to be. Again, this is going to be something that we'll have a much clearer picture on 13, 14 years from now. And this is more of the urban projects. All of these projects on all of these lists were generated through the local agencies. These were projects that, in your case, City of Fresno, Public Works identified, and it was similar for the other local agencies in Fresno County. So why 30 years? This is a frequent question we get. Why are you locking us in for 30 years? And this slide is intended to show that if we only went with a 20-year measure, we'd have to spend $3.2 billion of that on fixing roads, which leaves $800 million for the other programs. And that's just, we don't believe that's acceptable, that we need to be supporting all of the programs that are included in the current measure. So by going to a 30-year measure, we're at $6.8 billion. That means we can spend about half the money on roads, but we've got half the money to dedicate to these other programs. These are, I think I've actually covered this. I mean, that's the $3.2 billion is the minimum that we need in order to get to a pavement condition index in the good category of 70. The category is a little bigger than this. It's $3.5 billion, and the reason is we would have to get it done in 20 years to do the $3.2 billion number. If we take longer, then the number gets bigger. Our plan is to bond future revenues so that we can get as much of this possible done in the first 20 years, but there can be bonding costs associated with that. So this gives us a little bit of flexibility in both of those areas. The 30-year measure gives us additional flexibility in bonding. You can bond against a 20-year revenue, but you've got a bigger pot to bond against if you've got 30 years. And really it's, we don't want to wait. In fact, we don't even need to, assuming this passes in November, we don't have to wait till 2027 to get started on this. We can bond revenues and we can bring them in and actually start these needed repairs sooner. We can also look at borrowing against, an agency borrowing against their future Measure C revenue as a way to get this going. There are lots of benefits to getting this done now. There's an air quality benefit of fixing roads and making sure, and this is maybe more in the county than in the city, but roads that are in poor condition, road without shoulders, increase PM 2.5 and PM 10, which are a couple of the priority pollutants that we're not doing so well in. And maybe most importantly is the voters support it as much as they do a 20-year measure. The other question that we get is why 2022? And I think, again, there are a number of very good reasons why 2022 makes sense. Polling is incredibly high. We don't know what it would be in 2024. It could remain high, or it could turn the other direction. And we feel like with this kind of support and this low of opposition, we really need to move now. We did present in the poll potential negative arguments. In other words, if you heard this, would it change your opinion of Measure C? And while it did drop the support, it still remained in the 70s. So we need to be at 67% in order to pass. I already talked about the bonding potential. I mean, we could conceivably be paving roads in a couple of years after this passes if we aggressively look at bonding and borrowing. And not only does that bring benefits sooner, but it lowers the costs. Construction costs, frequently, they almost always exceed bonding costs, and so it makes sense to get this going. 2024 is going to be a presidential election. Those tend to be more divisive, and we would prefer not to be on that ballot. Again, residents are clear, fix our roads. The plan is well thought out. It has had a robust public input process. That was challenging with COVID, but we think we still did a very good job at identifying what the public felt were their needs, both through the public outreach and through the polls. Again, it delivers projects faster, which lowers the cost. And I do want to point out, there's concern that, okay, you're putting a lot of money into roads, but really all the major modes of transportation depend on roads. Buses run on roads, bicycles typically run on road shoulders, and pedestrians use sidewalks adjacent to the road. We believe that that at least part of the motivation for delaying to 2024 is this does provide too much local control, that there are people that would like to see this much more prescriptive and to remove that flexibility from the elected bodies. Whether they would be successful or not is another matter, but we think that this is one of the reasons. Secondly, there's a move at the state level to basically take away our local control on what we do with our measure funds. And so we think it's critical to get this measure in place now while we still have the ability to make these decisions locally. So conclusion, I don't know that I really need to read through these. I just want to stress how important this is. Someone asked me a while back, how would you ever go to not being a measure county? And I think that's an important question to ask ourselves. There is so much funding flexibility that the measure brings. There's matching fund potential that the measure brings. And I think this would be catastrophic to all 16 of our agencies if we were not able to move forward with Measure C. The investment in the city of Fresno is significant, $4.3 billion. I think there's a lot that we can collectively do in the city of Fresno and the other areas of the county with a renewed Measure C. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Sorry, I got a brain freeze there. We're going to hear from the community in their presentation, and then we'll Q&A.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Veronica, you're up. And if you have a flash drive for our city clerk to put up your presentation.
I also have copies for each council member and city manager. Oh, thank you. All right, I'll go ahead and start. Good morning, everyone. My name is Veronica Garibay. I am the Co-Executive Director of Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Thank you for the opportunity for allowing us to speak today. As we get the presentation started, I am joined here today by several members of our coalition who are sitting here, wave, there we go, who have come together and have been engaged in the Measure C process since It was first launched with a report to the Fresno Council of Governments Policy Board in January of 2020. As we get the presentation started, we'll go ahead and start. We are working with a coalition of 36 groups. As you'll see in the presentation, these are groups that have engaged in transportation planning in and around Fresno County, in the city of Fresno itself, and throughout small cities, in the communities for several years, including personally for more than 14 years, and have been engaged in the development of several regional transportation plans, including requirements by the state to establish the first ever sustainable community strategies under SB 375. We've engaged in an annual unmet needs process that the COG hosts every year. We have participated in the development of regional transportation action plans. We've participated in the development of regional active transportation guidelines. And so our work is based on years of organizing with community residents, because we know that transportation is not just transportation alone. We know that investments in transportation pave the way for affordable housing, for healthy and thriving neighborhood development, for investment in basic services, for connectivity to economic opportunity, including connectivity to healthcare, education, jobs. And so we do not take this lightly and have brought together a coalition that really seeks to engage and work with you to really make sure that taxpayers, because this is taxpayers' hard-earned money, which you all know and can testify to how difficult that is given poverty levels in our community, how important that is. So I'll go ahead and start. This is, we really do believe that Fresno can do better than what is being proposed. The next slide, I really do think it's important to talk about how we got here and that you have a full comprehensive picture and understanding of the process and what it took to get here today. As I noted earlier, in January 2020, the staff reported to the FCTA and the Fresno COG Policy Board a staff report that talked about the renewal of Measure C. In that report, and all of these are publicly accessible materials that are posted online, in that report, staff talked about convening the two committees that Mike just mentioned, the Technical Working Group and the Executive Committee. They talked about a staff-led process. Staff was going to identify members of the committees based on desired characteristics, which in our opinion are arbitrary. And they recruited Executive Committee members either directly or with the help of several participating members of the committee. That was in January 2020. At that meeting, we made comments urging the policy board to stop and pause their proposed process and instead work directly with the community and with the jurisdictions to fund and implement an equitable and transparent public process. Those comments went unheard. And in March 2020, COVID shut everything down. As we know it, none of us saw that coming. There was a real impact to our community, and you all can testify to how hard everyone had to hustle to keep people from dying and people from keeping their homes and having access to basic services, because we don't have the health infrastructure systems and the institutions to really take care of our communities in the way that we needed to take care of them in COVID. So COVID shut everything down, meaning it also shut down a lot of the public processes and requirements and opportunities for the public to provide input. And then in February 2021, as Mike noted, the staff launched the two committees. Those were the first committee, the Executive Committee and the Technical Working Group met for the first time in February of 2021. Next slide. And that's when we joined the Technical Working Group. In full disclosure, Leadership Council was appointed to the Technical Working Group. We had a representative on the Technical Working Group Committee as of February 2021. At that meeting, my colleague raised, again, similar concerns about this is a local sales tax measure. This is something that taxpayers should be engaged in. We need to talk about a robust and authentic and inclusive public process. And her comments, she was told there will be this process, this will happen, and then it didn't. So I'm going to walk you through a timeline. It has been reported and several comments have been made about community groups not offering solutions, community groups not coming to the table with proposals on how to make this process better and how to talk about what we, how to make it better, or that simply we don't know what we're talking about, which is incredibly offensive to community residents, including taxpayers and voters who will see this for the first time on the ballot in November, if this goes forward this year. In March 2021, a coalition sent the first letter to the Fresno County Policy Board and to the FCTA Authority Board asking for a transparent public process. Again, this is March 2021. In April 2021, the Drive Coalition sent an additional letter talking about process and the importance of making sure that there was sufficient community engagement throughout, given the history, quite honestly, the history of community engagement that the city of Fresno has invested in and has prioritized, like the development of the Southwest Pacific Plan, like the Transformative Climate Communities process, like the general plan update. So Fresno is no stranger to inclusive and transparent community processes. So that letter went in April 2021. That kicked off a series of meetings between us and the co-chairs of the executive committee, the late Mayor David Cardenas and the co-chair Clovis Councilmember Lynn Ashbeck. In May 2021, we were asked, well, what process would you want to see? So how would you do this if it were up to you? We submitted a draft to the co-chairs of a proposed process that was very much modeled after the work that we've done with many of you in the city of Fresno, but also after the work and the success of following our youth and youth voices through the Measure P process, knowing that when we listen to community and we put community in the driver's seat, good things come. You have a significant budget because of Measure P that you wouldn't have otherwise had. Next slide. That set off a series of meetings in July 2021 because of our work and conversations with the late Mayor David Cardenas and co-chair Lynn Ashbeck. The executive committee responded by adding 5 additional seats to the 27-member renewal. So committee launches in February. In July, they add those additional seats that you see listed on your presentation. They appointed someone from the Youth Leadership Institute, someone from the Westside Community Small Business Owner, someone representing people with disabilities in our community, the Fresno State Transportation Institute, and then they said that all the CBOs, the 23 organizations that sent the letter in 2021 could pick 1 seat, or Drive could have it. We said no. In September, we continued conversations, and in September 2021, again, a robust coalition of community groups and the Drive Coalition sent an additional letter asking for a process. It was then that we recommended we had 3 big recommendations. 1, hire a neutral facilitator, someone who can bring together all the stakeholders in the community to talk about how we renew Measure C, how we assess needs, how we talk about allocation formulas. The second was expand the Executive Steering Committee to be truly representative of the interests of all of Fresno County. And the third was fund a strong public process. Measure C dollars have been used to pay for the process to date. We could have been using those resources, our taxpayer money, to invest in a process that we could all participate in. In November, the committee did not meet. In November 2021, we sent an additional letter, this time recommending certain organizations and community partners to sit on the executive committee. Remember, this was November 2021. They launched the process in February. We had to fight to get community representation for nearly 9 months on the committee. At the December meeting, there were 5 additional appointments were made to the executive committee. That included myself, representing Leadership Council, Sandra Celedon, representing Fresno Building Healthy Communities, Nayamid Martinez, representing Central California Environmental Justice Network, and Jerry Yang. That was, so our first meeting of the committee, we joined in December of 2021. In January of 2022, at that same meeting, staff released a proposed funding categories document and goals and objectives that they wanted input from the committee over the holidays. We were the only members of the committee in January 2022 to submit written comments on both goals and objectives, process, and priorities that the measure should be focused on. That was in January 22. In March 2022, we submitted an entirely red-line document of the proposed funding programs, sub-programs, and eligible categories. That was submitted in March 2022. We received a response from Mike Leonardo saying that while there was agreement in some areas, some of the stuff that we were asking for was not possible. Next slide. So that's how we got here today. In May of 2022, the community groups on the executive committee formally resigned from the executive committee after the executive committee took a vote to move forward with making a recommendation that the measure move forward on the 2022 ballot, but also after several repeated attempts to have conversations about needs, about performance metrics, about accountability, about discussing the allocation frameworks, and to no avail. In fact, at the last meeting that we participated, not one single person in the room could tell us how equity was being defined in this plan. So next slide, the proposed expenditure plan and implementing guidelines. I'm sorry, can we go back to this? Thank you. As Mike noted, the public documents are now out for public review. The expenditure plan, the implementing guidelines, 2 errata sheets based on changes that have been made since the release of some of the plans, and the allocation framework. From a high-level perspective, we've completed a full analysis of the plan, the allocation, and here's sort of where we see things. This is why we believe Fresno can do better, but Fresno deserves better. The allocation percentages are arbitrary and fail to account for the magnitude of need, the magnitude of the climate crisis, and the magnitude of our growing air quality problem in the region. The funding and the major category for local streets, the 51% pot, would prohibit agencies from funding sidewalk, curb and gutter, streetlights, and vegetations. You would only be allowed to use those funds for ceiling, overlay, storm, drainage, if it is in an area declared a disaster area by the US President. It significantly reduces funding for much-needed public transit and active travel. We know that our communities for years, for decades, have been asking for more frequent, more reliable, affordable, to Councilmember Maxwell's credit, free bus fare, Wi-Fi on buses to get to where we need to go within our own communities, within cities, between cities, and connecting people from Fresno County to the city of Fresno as the 5th largest city in California, where the majority of services are located. There's minimal investment in climate resilience and environmental sustainability. You just saw Mike put up those frameworks up there, which is backwards investments to what is needed to confront the magnitude of the climate crisis in our community. There are no public process requirements outlined in the expenditure plan or the implementing guidelines for any subsequent amendments, the strategic implementation plans, or the capital improvement plans that each agency would have to develop every 5 years, outside of a hearing of the Fresno Council of Governments Policy Board or the FCTA approving it on their own. There's no oversight of FCTA administration and how the administration works and seeks to engage the public over the next 30 years. There are no performance metrics, data collection, or evaluation requirements included in either of the plans. In fact, the plans state that after voters approve this money, the FCTA will work with, will hire consultants to help develop performance metrics and accountability metrics for the allocations and the programs. There are no local job or workforce development requirements, apprenticeship-type programs, or training programs included in the measure or any of the documents that would allow for local job creation with Measure C dollars in our community. And the Citizens Oversight Committee is simply a committee that will receive reports, that will does not have any sort of decision-making authority or any enforcement requirements or any real opportunity. And in fact, the plan says that they will formally meet once a year, and there will be other meetings if necessary. So looking ahead to 2024, this is our next slide, our coalition is saying, I want to be clear about something because this also seems to be a rumor, that we do not support Measure C. We do. Measure C is an important local sales tax transportation dollars that can create local opportunity, can leverage state and federal funding, and gives us the opportunity to think creatively, think transformatively for future generations. Measure C doesn't expire until 2027. So whatever you do, if whatever happens, this doesn't take into effect until 2027 anyway. We have the time to do this right. Let's fund a community-driven process that is inclusive, that is transparent, and that really invests in all of us, not just certain interests. Next slide. So what is our vision for Measure C? And I'll note that for us, it's investing in neighborhoods and communities long excluded from investment. The proposed formula for directing cities to allocate, 30% of their fund, until you get certain PCI, the definition is either the top 25 of CalEnviro screen census tracts or areas that are below 80% of the statewide median household income. Well, all of Fresno County is below, except maybe for Clovis, but the majority, so that isn't targeted. That's not equity. That's not investing in the communities that need it the most. We need to conduct an accurate analysis of need that goes beyond just road conditions, that looks at what are our real transit needs, how do we connect people, how do we move people to employment opportunities, how do we create jobs in order to have a conversation about what the allocation framework should look like. We want to see a doubling down to address our climate crisis and poor air quality in our region. That means increasing and expanding frequent, reliable, and affordable transit, particularly free transit for youth, low-income people with disabilities, and our seniors in our community. Electrify public transit fleets and invest in grid capacity to be able to sustain electrification of our fleets with truly renewable sources. We need to fix our local streets, including our sidewalks, curb and gutter, vegetation, street lights, signage, making it easier for people with disabilities to navigate our community. And that means that in many existing neighborhoods and communities, those services and amenities don't exist. Install zero-emission infrastructure, charging networks, solar and storage to allow that to happen. We know where the state is going. You know where the state is going. The state has established very, very ambitious climate goals. They're aligning policy and investment programs to help reach those goals. The city of Fresno should seek to leverage those funds by creating local sources to be able to do that. And we need to align our local efforts with state climate goals. And invest in mobility hubs. If you all have not seen the presentation and the work of Moses Stites at the Fresno County Rural Transit Agency around increasing access to public transit, mobility hubs, solar, it's a great presentation. I'd recommend that you ask him to come present on that work, which is innovative, and it's what all the agencies should be doing. We need measurable performance metrics and data collection requirements before going to the voters. Communities have asked, I have given and contributed to Measure C, all taxpayers, for years, and I haven't seen a dime back in return, not in my community, not in any way seen it connect. I don't have access to transit to get to a specialty care doctor, and I need to pay my neighbor to get me there because our transit systems don't. We need to prohibit continued taxpayer money to subsidize sprawl. City of Fresno is plagued with issues related to sprawl, and I'll note that Madera County is moving their own measure this year as well, and they're moving with a forever tax. So you should look at the implications of what Madera County is proposing to the city of Fresno in particular. We need to embed public review and accountability requirements for amendments, updates, and implementation plans. We need to require local hire, workforce development, and training. And this is just a bit of what we've heard for decades in our community. This isn't something new. This isn't something that we're coming up with. This is what community residents have said over and over again, and in fact said in the 2 public workshops that have been held since 2020 by staff, specifically regarding Measure C. Finally, in conclusion, I'll end with, we're talking about $6.84 billion over 30 years. This is hard-earned taxpayer money. We know that equity starts in the process, and closed-door decision-making, which is what has happened here, is not how we earn public trust and how we get community support for this, and does nothing to build relationships across stakeholders in our community. We know that Measure C goes beyond transportation. The impacts are felt far and wide. We're talking about housing, water, land use, access to basic services, life expectancy, public health. All of these issues are interconnected, and to not look at them as such would be a disservice to our community. How need is defined here, we need to have a conversation about that. And finally, I'll end with, let's not gamble with the future of our youth, with future generations, because that's what we're doing. This measure, if it goes forward in 2022 as proposed, would lock us in through 2057. That's mid-century. Many of us won't be here then 10 years from now, 15 years, because of term limits for some of y'all, won't be here then to be able to really see the impact of what we did today and how that will impact future generations. We deserve better, and we deserve a process, and we welcome a healthy debate about what should be funded, how we fund it, how we prioritize, to really show that to our community that when we do this right, we can be a model for the rest of the Valley, but also the rest of the state, and that the Valley does not believe in going backwards, that Fresno, as the 5th largest city in California, does not believe in going backwards. Fresno believes in investing in people and opportunity, and we have the ability and the opportunity to do that with Measure C. Let's not give away that opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, let's come back up here to the council. This is a workshop, so there won't be public comment on this particular item, given that it is a workshop. There is no vote on this today. Item 4A was removed from the agenda earlier in the meeting. So coming back up to council, I have Council Vice President Maxwell, followed by Councilmember Carbasi.
Thank you, Council President. I did want to address the two different presentations we just got. I want to thank LCJA for providing your view on the measure, but I specifically want to thank Mr. Bourne and Mr. Leonardo for taking the time out. I know we've met a couple times and you've run us through this, and I just appreciate you guys taking the time to educate us on this. I can't imagine what a difficult task it must be to weigh the interest of an entire county that has significantly different needs and put together a $7 billion tax over 30 years. I know that's no simple task. And along with that comes some folks who are happier than others. People want a little bit more of this, want a little bit less of this. And so I just wanted to talk about that a little bit because transportation is one of my passions and one of the things I've really tried to drive here on this council over the last 18 months. Those of you that know me, you know that I am chair of the City Council Transportation Committee. One of my first major acts of legislation was the Zero Fare Clean Air Act that was alluded to earlier. And the reason that this is such a priority for me, and I think probably for all my colleagues, a lot of the things we fight for up here are priorities, not just for the folks that we represent in our own districts, but also priorities based off of the upbringings and the lifestyles and the personal experiences we've had to get into this seat. And I could tell you for myself, growing up as a kid, public transportation was huge. Was raised on welfare, was raised on food stamps. We were one of those families making less than $20,000. And I could tell you with all sincerity, if it weren't for public services like our public transportation here in the city of Fresno, I would not be sitting where I'm at today. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I can guarantee you that I am not. I did take a look at the survey results conducted by FCTA and COG, and they did do some very extensive polling, and the numbers are clear. 83% of those making less than $20,000 support a Measure C renewal. This is something that's important to them because I think, like my family, a lot of folks making less than $20,000, living in poverty, right on the line or barely above the poverty line, rely heavily on public transportation. And that's why for me it was really disheartening during this process to hear folks say that to expect people to take public transportation is an idyllic dream. And I think that's one of the issues we've had is we create these self-fulfilling prophecies where we tell ourselves this is not needed, this is not a value, and we invest less in it. And it leads to that cycle where you make it less accessible, less desirable. You're gonna get less people utilizing that service, and it makes it easier to take away more funding in additional years because you're creating a system that doesn't work for the folks that rely on it. I don't know if anybody in this room knows this number because we recently just got it with our 2022 FACTS ridership survey. The median income of somebody who rides our Fresno buses. The median income of somebody who rides our Fresno buses, $13,800. $13,800, the median income of a Fresno fax writer. That is well below poverty. And I could tell you, looking back at the data and working with our fax director, who I think has done a phenomenal job, Joe Vargas, and his predecessor, Greg Barfield, doing a phenomenal job of increasing ridership on our fax buses. Last 2 years have been an anomaly with COVID-19, which, by the way, we are starting to see a steady increase in ridership again, but I can tell you before March 2020, year after year after year, we were seeing a steady increase in our bus ridership. And that's because our city has made that a priority, both at the time Director Barfield and now Director Vargas. They know the asset that public transportation is to our community, have invested accordingly. The councils over the years and the mayors over the year have done the same because they know what an asset that has been for our community. And a good chunk of our riders are coming from South Fresno, and a good chunk are coming from Central Fresno, which is the area I represent and the folks that put me in this position. We, as a city, rely heavily on Measure C to subsidize our local transportation. Half of our state match requirements are met by Measure C funds, meaning that if we didn't have those Measure C funds to match, we would not be getting millions of dollars of state revenue towards our local transportation system. Now, in years past, this last Measure C that we're currently in, we were at 21% for public transportation here in the city of Fresno. Early conversations for the renewal, 30-year renewal of Measure C, put us at 9%. Is that more money? Well, technically, yes, because it's a 30-year tax. It's a much longer period of time. But as a percentage year over year, it is not. And I give kudos to our mayor for fighting for the city of Fresno to bring us up to 12% from that 9%. But frankly, with all due respect, that's still not enough. We would have to go up to 19% in order to just meet the baseline of where we're at right now. Meet the baseline services with the current Measure C that we're getting. We'd have to go up 7% just to meet the baseline. We as a city of Fresno, and I think I speak for everybody, value our public transportation. We recognize that we are not a wealthy community, and a lot of folks don't have access to vehicles. That's why we continue to invest in things like the Midtown Trail. That's why we continue to invest in things like protected bike lanes. That's why we continue to invest in things like microtransit. That's why we continue to invest in things like our fax system, because we know that that is needed by a good chunk of folks living here in our community. And if you're like me and you think there's value in things like $1 fare for the general population, 0 fare for veterans, military personnel, children 0 to 12, if you value frequency and ridership, you don't want to take an hour and a half to get to work and an hour and a half to get home. If you value expanded routes to get to more places throughout our city, if you value Wi-Fi on our buses to do work and homework on your way to school or work, I can't promise you that this measure is going to deliver on that. And so, while there are some things I do like in this measure, public transportation is one of my top priorities. And frankly, I'm not sure I can support a measure that doesn't support our working class families. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks. Thank you, Council President.
Councilmember Carbasi, followed by Councilmember Soria.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Leonardo, would you mind coming up? Thank you. And you may have covered this or in other forums, but I'd like to go into more detail. Can you tell us, I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars reinvested in communities in this county. But when it comes to workforce development and keeping those dollars here, working with the building trades, can you tell us if there are any plans and how that looks? As you may know, Fresno does have a PLA, and that's a model that we are looking to explore more because of, again, helping people that are at that level of making $13,000 a year, for example, and be able to move up through a training program. I mean, look, I'm very fortunate I got to go to university at Fresno State, but some people, want to go to a trade and work immediately after high school, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, sometimes it pays a lot more than a college degree. So can you give us more details on what the plans are to capture our dollars and keep them local?
Sure. So it's not specifically addressed in the measure language, but I don't know if you have seen it, but a week or two ago, I sent a letter to Director Mosier regarding the city of Fresno's PLA, and basically what I said in there was that there's no prohibition of the city using Measure C funds on projects that are under the PLA. And in my mind, that's the right solution, is to let those decisions be with the governing body. Fresno is a large enough community that you can do that. But for instance, if we wouldn't want to put that imposition on Fowler, who probably doesn't have the population base in order to have a PLA specifically to Fowler. So I would say that the measure is intended to be neutral to allow you to make those decisions.
Well, and I do appreciate that. From the city of Fresno standpoint, from a countywide standpoint, I'm trying to understand, are there requirements on local hiring, for example? I mean, we only have so many personnel sometimes. I get it, you have to bring people in. That's why training is so important. Are there any investments made in the apprenticeship process or pre-apprenticeship processes as a pathway to the kind of career that can give you the ability to build some of these great projects?
Yeah, again, I mean, it's not specifically addressed in the measure, but as I presented earlier, almost 85% of this money is at your discretion. Okay. It comes to you. I don't make the project decisions. Tony doesn't make the project decisions. You do. And so I think that the measure does empower you to ensure those local jobs. And I echo your comments. I think, I've met with local labor leaders here, and the type of change that an apprenticeship program can bring to people who are traditionally either low income or they may have a problem with a past jail time, things that are a block to actually becoming productive and having a great job. And I mean, the apprenticeship program within the unions is fabulous at taking those people. So, I mean, again, I think our goal is to empower that. But, and frankly, one of the problems you can get into in requiring it is maybe not everybody supports that. And, it's critical that we have a measure that really has universal support. So right. We just think that allowing each agency to make those decisions is the appropriate way to keep those jobs local.
And I'm sensitive to that, but I can tell you that 6 of the 7 council members in this city, a supermajority, do support that.
Right.
What I would like to ask one more question, though. As you go through this process and you have a lot of people that are well known to us that are involved in the development of this measure, do you have people at the table from labor or people from the building trades that would be involved in these projects? Have they been a part of this conversation?
Yes, they are represented on both of those 2 committees.
Okay. All right. Those are my questions. Thank you. Okay.
Councilmember Soria, followed by Councilmember Arias.
Mike, you can probably stay up here. My questions are for you. As you were going through, and I probably missed some of the questions that I had just because I usually like to ask questions through the workshop, but I know that prolongs sometimes the presentation. I did have a couple questions in terms of the process that you guys went through to come up with the list in terms of Tier 1 and Tier 2. What is your guys', is there like a formula? I understand that you guys worked with several of the governing bodies to ask for projects, but how did you guys make that final determination? Who was it? You? Was it the entire committee? Like how did that first reiteration of the Tier 1 and Tier 2 come about?
Okay, so the very beginning is it started with COG's RTP. They have an extensive list of projects even beyond, you're talking about basically the major highway and road projects, but they also have a list of transit needs. All of those were part of the initial look. So there was a huge list, pages and pages of projects that the local agencies had identified through their RTP submittal for what was a priority for each agency. We needed to split that into urban and rural because they're very different. And so we did that based on agency. We then, at the staff level, we tried to look at, okay, what's a project, say, within the city of Fresno that's of regional significance, because that's what this program tries to address, is not just specific local needs, but needs that go beyond the boundaries. And we also worked with the technical working group on that. So we kind of made a first cut at what is regional and what isn't, and then we talked to the technical working group about that. We then formed a subcommittee of the technical working group primarily for the urban side, because the urban list was much bigger than the rural list. The technical working group actually was able to come up with what their priority projects were based upon each agency that was represented in that group. But we needed the urban people to take a look at, okay, what are really the highest priority projects? And so City of Fresno, City of Clovis, and then we had Fresno County really just representing the unincorporated areas within the Fresno Clovis area. And then myself and Tony Bourne to take a look at, okay, how do we prioritize the city projects? And these were not a priority 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was really groups, because we kind of knew, based upon the analysis we did, how much money we had available. So that subcommittee, I'll focus on the urban area. That subcommittee focused on getting that list.
Who was the subcommittee?
It was Scott Mosier, Mike Harrison from City of Clovis, Steve White from Fresno County. And then, as I said, Tony and I were also on it. So they narrowed the list down to the highest priority projects for the urban area. And they also were able to take a look at the split between Fresno and Clovis, and that's how we ended up with the 80-20%. Now, one of the things we did do is we asked our consultant to do an independent ranking of projects, came up with some scoring criteria, and they ranked them. But that was really, we didn't use that other than just to provide the subcommittee with something to look at as they prioritize these. So at the end, that's how we came up with the Tier 1 list. The Tier 1 list is not in priority order. That has not been done yet. And it wasn't done in this current measure either. The prioritization of those projects, that needs to happen as we're able to look at things like deliverability, the flow of funds when we have money to do it. And so what we did I wasn't here for this effort, but I think we had come up with a 7-year list. It might have been a 5-year list in this measure, but in this we're proposing to look at, okay, of that list, how much should be done in the first 7 years, and then how much maybe because of delivery or cash flow needs to wait until the out 7 years. So that would really be the first shot at trying to put schedules to these. But we some of the projects, you and I have discussed how important Shaw 99 is. And in my mind as an engineer, that's the #1 project on that. But that could be a 5 or a 6 year project to get that delivered. And so we don't necessarily want projects that could be delivered sooner to wait for that. So it's a combination, like I said, of cash flow and what the need for the project is.
And is that why you guys chose the 15-year mark?
The 15...
That's what I'm concerned with, locking ourselves for 15 years, which... I don't know, it seems kind of long to me, and no ability to really, unless there's ability to amend, the projects, or, can you speak to that?
Sure. So I think there's 2 questions there. The 15-year mark was picked because it was in the middle. And, this measure locked us in for 20 years. 15 years is less than what we're currently locked into. So that seemed to be a good point. Doesn't have to be that. We could look at it in 10 years. You don't really want to, transportation projects take a long time, so you don't want to get it too short of a window. But 15 years just seemed to make sense as a point to make that analysis. However, The amendment process, and I was a little surprised that to hear that there were thought that it wasn't defined. I mean, we have a very defined amendment process.
What is that?
Basically, to do an amendment, it has to go through the Fresno Council of Governments first, and then it goes to the FCTA board, assuming the Fresno Council of Governments approves it. If the Fresno Council of Governments does not approve an amendment, the FCTA board then has to go to each individual city council and get approval. I believe it's the majority of the population in cities. So we've never used that amendment process. We've always relied on the COG and FCTA process to amend the plan.
And has there been instances in the last measure where the COG or the FCTA have initiated an amendment?
Yeah, I think we've amended it, I believe, 6 times. Probably the most significant ones that you may be familiar with is we amended it to allow litter pickup to be an eligible expense, and that's been very successful. We partnered, actually you partnered with us, City of Fresno partnered with us and took the lead in that. We were able to secure Caltrans money with that, so that was one amendment. We amended, I'm sure you recall the State Route 41 2-lane segment down at the county line where we had those 5 fatal accidents within a 2-month period. That project was not in the expenditure plan, so that's an example of where the community really came together and said, we need to put that project into the plan. Another was, and this was based on a City of Fresno suggestion, is we amended the plan to allow the high-speed rail heavy maintenance facility to be eligible for measure funds. So, you know, we try and not do a lot of amendments because we want to be true to the promises made, promises kept, but yet things do change, things come up that can't be anticipated, and so we have used that amendment process.
Is there a reason in terms of, and I appreciate that answer, is there a reason on some of the buckets, like for example, the environmental sustainability? I know that is 1% maybe, right?
2.
Or 2%, yeah, 2%. We know where the state is going, right, in terms of the policy goals that they've established. So what role should our county and should this measure really play in really making sure that families that are struggling are able to be part of advancing those state goals, in particular because we know that environmentally it will help us. And so I don't know if we really provide enough resources to address really the future of our community and, you know, as it stands within the state and the state goals that are being imposed on communities like ours.
Yeah, I think, you know, we view that environmental sustainability as over and above. And for instance, you know, there was a discussion of electric vehicles for transit, solar charging facilities, charging stations for electric vehicles. We've been doing that under the existing measure, both through the environmental program and through the transit program. And so, you know, I know that FACTS and the other transit agencies have been purchasing electric vehicles. Moses has been very proactive in putting in solar charging stations. And so those are all eligible under the transit program. They're eligible under your local choice program. They will be, you know, we have a project on, a current project on SR 99 to improve a couple interchanges, one in Fresno and one just south. And we're looking at putting in electric charging stations as a part of that project as a mitigation for the project itself. So it's not limited just to that environmental sustainability. There are sustainability elements within each of the other categories as well.
So are they requirements of the projects or just allowable investments? Because I think there's a difference, right?
Sure.
When you say, hey, you can use these dollars for this, but you must include this rather than, you know what I mean?
Right.
Because I think that there's an interest in ensuring that our local community does get to a place where we're meeting our goals, giving the environmental impacts that are much, much more significant here in our region.
Yeah, it's generally not It's not a requirement within those programs. But as I mentioned earlier, we believe those decisions are best made by the elected bodies that represent the people in the county. And so our view is to empower you to be able to make those choices. There is one area that we do require it. So in the it's not environmental directly, but for instance, in active transportation, there's requirements within the local choice program and the regional program that if you build a road with Measure C, you must provide a bike lane as a part of that. And so, that's not in the environmental sustainability category, but it is an effort to reduce vehicle miles traveled. It's air quality. There's a health benefit to that. So there is a little bit of that, but it's generally up to the local agencies to decide to invest in that.
I just don't see if we're doing it for that, why we wouldn't do it for the other. Because it's the same thing, right?
It's a little harder to quantify. I mean, it's pretty easy to say if you're going to build a road, you need to have a shoulder wide enough to accommodate a bicycle. Specifying that you've got to put in EV charging stations, for instance, well, some of that is geography dependent,
Yeah,
right?
well, it doesn't have to be EV charging stations. It could be a number of things that could. It could be like a menu of options of things that could be done that are connected to sustainability. That's, just a point that I wanted to make. I did also want to ask about, you mentioned bonding. When you bring up bonding, what is the vision that you guys have in terms of the bonding ability for future revenues?
So I kind of have two visions of that. And I'll start with, I mentioned Shaw Avenue. I think that would be an ideal project to bond. And primarily, I would want to get started. As I said, that could be a 5-year project. And so if we were approved in 2022 and we could start project development on that project, we could be ready to go to construction when the revenues come in. And if we're ready before the 2027, we could bond against that as well. So that's one example of a project that I think could lend itself well to bonding. There are others in there, but that's just, to me, as I said, that's one of the highest priorities.
Would the bonding be limited to existing infrastructure, or are we gonna be getting into the business of building new infrastructure with this bond? Like, how is the bonding language written?
The language itself is pretty broad. It just indicates that we will consider bonding if it's cost effective. It doesn't say how we would bond. If I could, I want to go back, though, that was Shaw Avenue's one. The more important one is this rehabilitation program. I mean, these are now needs. These are not 2027 needs. These are now needs. And so I would want to aggressively go after bonding against those revenues so we can start those road repair projects quickly after the measure is renewed. There's also the possibility of borrowing against future measure revenues at the agency level. So there's we could do it and make the money available, or you could borrow against the future measure revenues. As far as whether new infrastructure or not, it somewhat depends on your definition. I mean, Shaw Avenue interchange would be new infrastructure in my mind, but it's not a new road, it's not a new lane, it's not adding capacity, it's fixing existing infrastructure. So this measure just doesn't have the expansion of the state highway system the way the previous two do. So I don't see bonding. I mean, those projects are really not in the measure, so we wouldn't be bonding against them because they don't exist.
Okay. The other thing that I wanted to also ask, and I think the community-based organizations brought this up in terms of the definition for needs. What was your guys' when you guys were going through the process and identifying, because I think you guys also put 30%, right, for disadvantaged areas. Why did you guys select 30%? Isn't our county, like, pretty much most of the areas disadvantaged? Why wouldn't we want to increase that percentage?
30% was somewhat arbitrary. And I don't think that there would be substantial objection to making that higher.
Yeah,
Because I think
we
your
should
point
get-
is valid.
Most of the county is disadvantaged. So I think that it should probably even be opposite, 70-30, right? 70% of the dollars should be going to address disadvantaged areas.
The one caution I would have, and I mean, I'm not, 70 may work. As we're fixing these roads, you cannot let your good roads degrade. As I'm sure Scott's given you presentations of how cheap it is to keep a road in good condition versus how expensive it is to fix a road. So you do need to keep an investment going in maintaining your good roads in good condition. I don't know where that balancing point is. I mean, again, we look at this as county-wide, not at an agency level. So, could it be increased? I think certainly it could. But I do want to emphasize that you do have to keep attention on your good roads as well.
No, yeah. Scott reminds us about that as well. I think. Yeah, and then I know your answer to the local hire question, because that was another thing that I had. I get it that the city of Fresno, at least in the most recent years, has been much more forward-thinking when it has come to realize that we're an area with such high levels of poverty, that we should want to empower our own families to, get the training necessary to be the ones employed in these really good paying jobs, because that's what this infrastructure investment is, right? They're really good paying jobs with pension, health benefits, and so on. And so I'm glad that the measure doesn't preclude communities like ours from employing our, PLA. It doesn't have to necessarily be a PLA as part of the Measure C, but I do believe that we should be setting some benchmarks of local hiring. Who wouldn't support local hiring? Just think about the message, right? We're putting our own Fresno County residents back to work. That's what that's what the message should be about. Not only are we going to build a better Fresno County, but we're going to make sure that our own Fresno County families are building that better Fresno County. That should be the message. And so I would want you guys to figure out a mechanism to include. It doesn't have to be a PLA, but it could. Before we did a PLA here in the city of Fresno, we did a local hiring. But that reminds every local community should want to figure out. I understand there's, the limitations of some of these small, but maybe it's Fresno County, right? Mm-hmm. Why shouldn't we want to hire Fresno County families? I'd rather Fresno County family who's paying that extra tax be hired than someone from, another county, Tulare County or whatever. We want folks from here to benefit and really see those dollars back recycled into our local communities. So I do think that, we as a community and as bodies and as leaders in this space, that we not just, kind of think a little bit outside the box with this new measure, but think broadly outside the box, because even though, yes, we're saying, more transportation dollars, we have to think about this as an opportunity to change lives in our community when it comes to the types of investments that we're going to be making, because it's about economic development and investing in communities that, have been left behind. And that's the opportunity that I see that still hasn't been addressed up to this point. And there is some time, so I'm hopeful that folks, I will say I tried to get on that executive committee. Unfortunately, I was told that I wouldn't be able to, because I would make 2 Fresno people on the executive committee. I don't know if you recall. I actually asked folks to see if I could get on, even though there were 2 Clovis members on the executive committee. So I wasn't very happy about that, but I do still have a voice in the process. I have a voice as an elected official representing District 1 residents, and this measure is extremely critical to me. So I want to, before I lend my support to whatever the final measure will be. I do believe there's an opportunity to work over the next few weeks to make some of those changes that will address the gaps that I believe, as it stands, this measure currently has. So thank you for being here, for answering my questions. And I think I have a couple other questions, but I'm going to have to circle back with you because I kind of lost some of the slides where I had them. So I'll come back.
Okay, and just one thing, I think I'd like to go back and look at a local hiring goal. I think that makes sense. Yeah, I think, and this is not the first that I've heard that, and it even goes beyond labor. I mean, there's consultant engineers here in Fresno have talked about, could you have a local preference for, let me see if we can't do something along those lines.
Councilmember Arias?
Thank you, Mike and Tony. I tend to be a lot more harsher than my colleagues, but hey, we all get paid six figures to deal with people like me, so welcome to the arena.
You get paid six figures, Councilmember Arias?
Not me, but
I
them.
thought we were at
and
five.
the mayor gets
Last I
paid.
checked.
The mayor gets paid seven figures, so he can handle it. Mike, walk me through your timeline, not specifically how you got here, but your timeline going forward before you get to the Board of Supervisors for a vote.
Okay, so I won't go all the way back, but let me go back to the beginning of the month at least, because I think that's an important milestone. So we posted the two committees, they approved the allocation plan. So basically, they approved the categories of spending and how much would be in there. We then put together our expenditure plan, a draft expenditure plan, which I mentioned it's on our website. I hope you've been able to see that. And we posted that for public comment. The public comment period for that document will end on June 27th. So we're looking to receive comments on that document as well as the implementing guidelines by the 27th. Then the Fresno Council of Governments meets on June 30th, and they will be considering whether to approve, disapprove, modify that expenditure plan. So between the 27th and the 30th, we'll be incorporating public comments into that document. We have already been incorporating comments as we get them when they make sense to include in the document. But so there'll be that time period between. Assuming that the COG board does approve a plan, then the FCTA board meets on July 20th. And they will need to then make final approval of the plan on that date.
And when you reference when they make sense to include them, who do they have to make sense to be included?
At this point, it's basically staff deciding whether to include them. I don't think we've had any comments that we haven't included yet.
So is it you and Tony?
We have a renewal team, so certainly Tony and I are the lead of that team, but we have a team of staff members. But let me clarify, that's just what the draft is. If people had made comments that we didn't think should be in there, there's an opportunity at Fresno COG to express those opinions. So it's not like, we make the final say. We're gonna finish the draft, but then it'll be up to COG to consider and listen to comments before they adopt.
And I have friends on the Fresno COG, and I know that most of them are rural, small mayors that don't have the professional staff that we do in a big city to read through everything and make recommendations. So you put it on the agenda, that group determines what
Yes.
gets included?
Yes.
And remind me, how many representatives does the city of Fresno have on COG?
One.
And we're 55% of the population, correct?
But it is correct, but it's also a population, they have two criteria. Majority of the members representing 40% of the population. So it's not impossible to make a decision without Fresno, but it's difficult.
Yeah, we definitely know it's not impossible because there's been several decisions made with Fresno's objection or without Fresno being present. So, Mike, I know there's technical formula for making decisions on COG. In your opinion, if our mayor opposed this proposal or any proposal before COG, would you still recommend it proceeding and the COG approving it?
That's really not my call to make, but if
The
the
staff
mayor,
recommends, correct?
if the mayor of the largest city in Fresno County is opposed to the plan, then I think we would have to take a hard look at, does this make sense?
And remind me, recently, the COG and the Fresno Transportation Authority changed a guideline for TOT revenue that where Fresno was gaining quite a bit of the resources, I think it's DOT, of the revenue for building high-density housing in public transit corridors. And your staff and FCTA changed the rules so that Fresno City, who is building and meeting that definition, would not continue to benefit in the same way, and other communities that simply had a bus stop would be eligible for some of those funds. And our city was opposed to that change, correct?
Well, FCTA didn't make the decision to make that change. That change was in the expenditure plan. The expenditure plan was built to where for the first 10 years, only the city of Fresno, and then afterwards, the eligibility was to be opened up.
And was the criteria changed? Did rural cities or Clovis build high-density housing in public transit corridors in order to access that money?
The criteria remained the same. There was not a change in criteria. It still was the same criteria. It just meant that other agencies were eligible.
Got it. And remind me, how many members do we have on the FCTA board of the city of Fresno?
2.
Who? So Member Soria and the mayor?
Yes, that's correct.
How many members does the board of supervisors have?
2.
And Clovis?
1.
And is that also based on population for decision making?
That was spelled out in the original, the 1986 measure. The membership was spelled out. I don't really know the history of that. It was changed in 2006 in that we added 2 public at-large members to the original 7.
Correct.
But that was spelled out in the legislation.
And currently, the public at-large are who?
Paul Sahota represents the rural public at large, and we have struggled to fill the urban vacancy. The current requirements are that Clovis and Fresno need to agree on that seat, and it's been difficult. We are putting provisions in to make that easier in the next measure so that we don't have this ongoing problem of having a seat unfilled.
What's the provisions for that?
Going forward? As I recall, what we wrote into this was that if that seat remains open for, I want to say 6 months, it was either 6 or 9 months, then the executive director may appoint someone. That person then remains in place until that term expires, and then it goes back again to the cities.
So in this case, it would be you making the appointment?
It won't be me in 2027, but yes.
Correct.
And again, that's not a decision that I want to have, but I want to have an urban member, and we haven't been able to make that happen.
Term limits. And you are aware that our city is probably the only city in the county that has term limits. And typically, when we're on these bodies, we serve for 1 year, where the Harry Armstrongs of the world get to be the board chair for 22 years. Now, Harry Armstrong 2.0 is Lynn Ashback. Now she gets to be on there for 20 plus years. So what I struggle with is 10% of the county has been driving Measure C since 1986, and as proposed, it would drive Measure C for another 30 years with the current structure as proposed in your current draft. So I struggle with that. Help me understand how that makes sense. In your presentation, you articulate this is about local control, but 55% of the population has not had control of the decision-making, either in the COG or on the FCTA, whereas 10% of the population has been driving the bus. Anyway, I digress. What's the definition of disadvantage?
Let me, if I could, I think we wrote
And
that
and
out.
if you also, do you have the definition of equity? You don't have to answer it today if you don't have it on hand, but a follow-up to those definitions would be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, if I could do that,
Yeah, that's fine. I noticed to Member Soria's point, local hire has been a priority for us. What's been the hesitation or objection by FCTA and the COG for the last 2 measures to have local hire?
I don't know that there was, I don't know that that was part of the discussion. I mean, in 2006, I wasn't with FCTA, so I don't know the discussions then. So to say there's a hesitancy, I don't know if that's really true. I just don't know that it came up, but it may have.
Okay. And Mike, I know you're head of FCTA, so what was the hesitation from FCTA to allow community groups in the process earlier?
The two things. We did have community groups from the beginning, and we generally, except for government, which was larger, we were looking for two representatives we had two business representatives, we started out with two ag representatives, we had two community-based organization representatives, and we were trying to keep the size of the committee small. It's just the bigger the committee, the more difficult it is to make decisions. So we felt that sector was adequately represented. Now, obviously, there are other opinions, and ultimately, we did significantly increase that participation, but that was the initial reason on why.
Out of curiosity, is there anybody on the committee that currently uses public transit?
Yes.
Who uses public transit?
The one I know of is Sarah Harris.
Okay.
Now, if there's more, I'm not sure. I just know Sarah does.
Thank you. In your estimation, why has there only been 2 public workshops outside of this one, I assume? Is it COVID? Is it just what you guys outlined early on? I mean, it's $7 billion that you're essentially requesting from the public. We have $1.8 billion budget, and I think this is our 5th day of public hearings, and it'll take us another few days of public hearings. What's the rationale for 2 public workshops?
It's been more than 2. The last, I think a month ago, we did 3. We did them in the same night, but we did 3. So we did one in Kerman, one in the metro area, that one happened to be held in Clovis, and then one in Reedley.
So you heard from the suburb in Kerman, the suburb in Clovis, and the rural community in Reedley? Well,
that was the last one. The one before that was actually held in the convention center here. And we had, after both of those, so there was the 3 in one night, there was the one at the convention center, and then we held a virtual workshop after each of those. We also, we piggybacked on to Fresno COG, went to every local agency as a part of their RTP process, and we had a presentation at those meetings as well. Those were the major all-community public workshops. So we really had 6 or 7.
Okay. On some additional questions, bonding, under the current proposed language, who makes a decision on bonding future revenue?
It would be the FCTA board.
So FCTA determines whether Fresno's revenue, future revenues on Measure C get bonded out?
I don't think that the FCTA board would make a specific decision for a city. As I mentioned, there's kind of 2 ways to do it. Either you could bond or borrow against your future revenue, or we could bond the program. And so if say we did a $100 million, $500 million bond for fixing local roads, Fresno would get a piece of that bond money. I don't know that we would bond specifically for you, but you could do it.
And I appreciate you bringing up the part on local streets. And I saw your polling, and I think several of us were just on the ballot. Most of us got one with 60%. So it forced us to go walk neighborhoods and talk to people. And in my district, as you may know, most of my district all depends, probably all of it, about 99% of it depends on the general fund to make road improvements or Measure C. And everybody wants the road fixed. Everybody wants the potholes to not just be filled, but reconstruction of the road to occur. And what we struggle with is, since it depends on the general fund, we'd have to pick police or fire in order to be able to repave, Floridora in the Tower District that hasn't been paved in 40 years. I also heard from a lot of neighbors that they were promised that when 180 was built, it would alleviate traffic in their areas and therefore improve the roads. And it only, made it worse. And there is no money to fix the roads adjacent to 180. So what I'm trying to understand, Mike, is that the structure of FCTA and the COG and the San Joaquin Air District Pollution Control District have fundamentally put the largest city and the majority of the residents of the county at a disadvantage from engaging in leading those conversations and advocating for the needs of the city. Not only do no other city or the board of supervisors have term limits, but they require some level of seniority and some level of longevity to be able to really lead these conversations, none of which we have. And the structures are such that we become the minority at the governing table when we are the majority of the resources being generated and of the resources needed. So from my perspective, the current structure worked in 1986 to the benefit of development and sprawl, but has been one of the root causes for the deterioration of the city's infrastructure. It hasn't fixed any of the existing roads in our city. If anything, it's added new roads that further draw money away from existing roads in residential areas. Are you proposing in this measure to change the makeup and the structure so that 55% of the county gets 55% representation on FCTA or the COG?
It wasn't included.
Okay.
And
That's fair. On your executive committee that you noted, as my colleague pointed out, City of Clovis has 2 representatives on the executive committee. City of Fresno has 1. How does that make sense that 10% of the population of the county gets 2 representatives and 55% of the population gets 1? Who made that determination?
So Lynn Ashbeck was one of the co-chairs for the Renewal Committee, and she was selected by FCTA to be that position. And so, I mean, I know you can have mixed loyalties, but she does not represent the city of Clovis on that committee. She represents FCTA. And any person from FCTA would have that same issue. So the other
So why not appoint member Soria, who serves representing the city of Fresno?
Frankly, it caused a quorum problem. We would have been in violation of the Brown Act. She would have been the 5th FCTA board member included on that.
You couldn't kick somebody else out?
Well,
you couldn't
sure.
kick off Buddy? You couldn't kick
Buddy
off
was
the
not
sheriff?
on it.
You couldn't
It
kick
would
off
have,
any others?
I'm trying to, so we had Mayor Castro from Mendota, Mayor Martinez from Fowler, Chair Ashbeck, and Mayor Dyer. And so if we would have kicked off, it really would have come down to kicking off either an East Side mayor or a West Side mayor. And so, no, I mean, I don't think that was part of the consideration. I will tell you that there was a very strong push at the executive committee to increase government's participation and role in that. I mean, they were less than 1/3 of the total membership. And while Councilwoman Soria would have had a quorum issue, none of the rest of you would have. So, I mean, there could have been a second City of Fresno seat.
And you didn't offer to any of us, did you?
We, staff was advocating additional local agency participation,
Okay.
and that was not the direction that the decision was made to go.
Understood. And your local funds that you've outlined here, and I'll try and get us out of here before lunch, there are limits on what those local funds could be used for, right? So if the city of Fresno wanted to fix the neighborhood streets in West Fresno, the Tower District, and you pick a neighborhood in Central Fresno, we would not be able to fix the broken sidewalks. We wouldn't be able to, do landscaping. It's just repaving the street, correct?
Under the current iteration, that is correct. That's not where we started. Where we started is we actually, I want to say we identified $4.5 billion for that program, and the very intent was to do exactly what you're talking about in order to address the entire streetscape. In various discussions, there was a desire to increase the local control allocation. And in order to do that, we had to reduce the pavement repair.
Understood.
And so we kind of cut that to the bare bones, that if we allowed street repairs, bike lane, that kind of additions within that category, then we wouldn't have the money to get to that good pavement condition. But we simply took that money and put it in local control.
Without reducing other categories like regional projects, correct?
True. I mean, I suppose that, they could come there, but what we did is we just moved the money into local control. And so there's nothing that prohibits you from taking some of your local control money. So you're going to fix Floridora and you want to repair the sidewalk. You fix the roads under the pavement, you fix the sidewalks under the local control. One contract does it all, just split funded in order to do it. So the money's still there. We just moved it from rehab into local control.
But you also anticipated that we would have to use some of this other flexible money to make up for the loss in public transit. So we would then have to pick between fixing the sidewalk or paying for the bus route.
Well, going off of Councilmember Maxwell's comments, if you move 7% out of local control into transit, you're still at 11% in local control. And so it's not an either or, it's both.
Yeah, you're making us choose between one or the other.
I'm letting you decide, but no, it's not one or the other. Like I said, it's both. You could do
you're
both.
not, because you've decided for us. Well, let me say it differently. FCTA decides for us every day, given the lack of representation. The COG decides for us. This measure is proposed, bakes in regional projects for 15 years at those amounts. So those are decisions we no longer have in this body. So when I get the complaint on why did you just repave the street and not fix the sidewalk or add the curb and gutter that's missing, I have to go back and say, well, Measure C limits my ability to do that because I have to fund that regional project that they decided needs to be done. I have to fund that additional lane on 41 that somebody else decided was prioritized.
Well, that's only 15%. That regional program's only 15%. And again, I mean, we put it in the language encouraging agencies to use their local control money to do a complete street.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think we're forcing you to make that decision of not fixing the sidewalks. I think we've given you the tools to do exactly that.
Why not just reduce the regional projects and let us decide as a local entity whether we should fund an additional lane on 41 or whether we should fund Shepherd expansion or Temperance or Veterans Boulevard? Why not allow us that ultimate local control to decide?
I believe we did. I mean, it was your staff that worked with us to come up with the project, so it may not have been the council, but
what we did, Mike, just to be clear, we sent you all the Tier 2 projects. You and Tony decided which ones were feasible to lift up. I don't ever recall in this body deciding that an additional lane on 41 was a priority for the city.
There's not an additional lane on 41 included in the Tier 1 project list. There are auxiliary lanes, which by definition have to be less than a mile long to improve operations on segments of 41, but there's not another lane on 41. And this wasn't Tony and I that made these decisions. Again, this was the urban subcommittee I talked about earlier, made up of the two cities, Fresno County, Tony and I, that narrowed this down to the Tier 1 list.
And if I recall, how much time did we have to submit projects to the body to be included in the regional?
I'd have to defer to Tony because actually that request came as a part of the RTP process that COG manages. But I don't, Tony, do you know?
Yeah, we give months, many months. Again, this is a process. Every 4 years we do this process called for projects. That's why we were able to submit the projects they're interested in, and they become a part of the kind of the pool of.
And Tony, when did you guys publish the expenditure plan that identifies what projects are Tier 1? Correct, the categories where the rubber meets the road, for lack of a better description. When did you tell us, here's what projects are Tier 1, here's how much is in each category?
It was at the beginning of this month.
Okay, thank you. And I know it's going to be lunchtime, so I'm just going to conclude it with this, Mike and Tony. I'm still struggling with this idea of local control and the urgency to do 22, and I recognize, why everybody wants to do 22. But Our city is 55% of the population. We're not getting 55% of the resources. We're 55% of the population. We don't have 55% of the representation on FCTA. 55% of the population, we don't have 55% of the representation on the COG or the executive committee as was created by you all. These regional projects lock us in for 15 years. So beyond my term limit's 8 years total. Maxwell's, all of ours. We have to constantly answer for why are you doing this project when the street in front of my house has been broken for 40 years. And I can't say we can reprioritize. Even amendments to the plan are in such a way that it puts the city and the majority of the population of the county at a disadvantage for those amendments. If you've allocated 51% of the funds for local streets, but the definition of local, the limits to what can be fixed in that fund are very clear. That would put older neighborhoods in our city that have been annexed to the city 80 years ago, that still don't have curbs and gutters, at a huge disadvantage, because it would depend on us taking from other buckets that fund public transit, that are used for match money for regional projects. As drafted, I personally feel that this actually takes local control from the biggest city in the county and would perpetuate 10% of the population in this county, the city of Clovis, from continuing to control and develop our regional transportation strategy for the next 30 years. And God bless Harry Armstrong. He pulled a great one in building 180 and 168 by not having term limits, by knowing how to operate the regional politics. But this body is no longer the body of 1986 or 2006. And this city needs a plan that goes into 2050. And I'm still seeing the same 1980 solutions, the same 1980 structure in governance and decision-making, taking us all the way to 2050. And I think there's quite a bit of improvements, especially when it's $7 billion. We're debating a $1.8 billion budget. And we've dragged our staff through every line item, 10,000 questions, 10 days of public hearings, hours of public input for people who don't agree with the recommendations in our final decision. I don't feel that it is fiduciarily responsible to sign off on $7 billion with a plan that's been, out publicly for a month, and dependent on a body where we are clearly, as a city, disadvantaged in the final decision before it goes to the Board of Supervisors. But with all that said, I do have a responsibility to provide you feedback, recommendations, and changes, and it'll be up to your body on whether you accept them or not. So our Transportation Committee will follow up in writing and in a follow-up meeting with you and Tony to give you very clear changes that we think are necessary, and your body will decide what it is, and we'll have to decide how to proceed after that. But I do really appreciate the fact that you've made yourself available. I appreciate the fact that the community organizations have expressed their position on it. But I do hope that you understand that I'm not trying to develop a Measure C that benefits my district or gets the pet project that I want. I'm trying to develop a Measure C that cleans the air so my 15-year-old can actually move back when she goes to college. Because it's a better city, it's a more walkable city, it's a public transit system that works, and I'm not interested. And I think this plan does this, which is I'm not interested for, I've been very clear that our city should not continue to subsidize sprawl in the fringes of the city. I think these regional projects do exactly that, but worse, they actually subsidize sprawl in Clovis and now in Madera. It's not our responsibility to bail out and build out an infrastructure at the fringes of Clovis or Madera. So I will not repeat the mistakes of the 1980s. Credit to those who developed the freeway system. Kudos for them. But I'm interested in rebuilding older neighborhoods who've been paying for Measure C for 40 years and are still waiting for their street to be fixed. So with that, I do want to appreciate the fact that you made yourself available and been very honest in your responses to us, and tolerated all our competing views and interests. Thank you.
Just one point of clarification. Lynn Ashbeck is not the chair of the SCTA board. It's Buddy Mendez.
You just lost my vote on that one. But thank
I
you
wasn't
again
trying
for
to convince you. I just wanted to set the record
Thank you again
straight.
for your honesty. I don't think Buddy would recognize a bus if it hit him.
So Councilmember Bredefield next.
Yeah, I just want, Councilmember Arias, you mentioned about the Transportation Committee sending a letter. So I have some concerns again about this entire body being represented. It's great for 3 members of a committee to send a letter, but your letter may not represent me. So I'm not sure how we deal with that, because that is something, I mean, and your questions are excellent questions, your points are well taken.
And Member Bredefield, it in no way was to attempt to represent the body or the city's position. When we met with them last week, they asked for specific feedback. We have read the whole measure with the administration and Public Works, and our intent is to give them the feedback from the last meeting that we had with them and the areas that we have concerns. The administration, of course, will give you a copy of the letter, and if you have differences, then of course, we could incorporate those when we finally have a full discussion on whether we support Measure C being renewed or not. But in no way am I trying to represent your position on it.
Maybe there's some way we could have a discussion on the agenda before you send the letter, and maybe then that letter can be more reflective of the body, which would be better. I don't know.
I can tell you that the reason I tabled our Measure C item was that we wanted to first do Q&A publicly, so that they're not answering questions that you're not aware of and giving an answer that you're not aware of. So we will follow up with our feedback. We'll get you a copy of that through the city manager, so it's not a Brown Act violation.
Right.
And then when we come back to vote on Measure C, then of course we'll have a full debate and they'll know the full city's position on it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, do I have anybody else on the dais wanting to speak on this issue? In that case, City Clerk, if you could please read off the closed session. I think we'll be going straight into closed after lunch.
Good afternoon. I will go ahead and read that. In closed session today, we have conference with real property negotiator for APN 508-030-48ST, property located at Herndon and Brawley. Existing litigation, Martinez versus City of Fresno. Existing litigation, Motley versus City of Fresno. Existing litigation, Centeno versus City of Fresno. Conference with labor negotiators, all labor. We would not expect to have any reportable items after closed session.